Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Right Opinion, the home of a twat with too much free time. And it's been a while. Yes, I've been busy, understandably so. This video was quite the undertaking, but I wanted to give it some sort of weight, and I hope I do. A while back, I Hate Everything made a video on Star Wars. I won't say much more because we're going to be addressing a lot of that very soon. It was one of his more controversial releases for many reasons, and ready to dispute it was a YouTuber by the name of Rags. Now, Rags appears to be a creator who talks about a mix of media and politics, particularly with the leaning into the entertainment industry, which is an interesting genre without a doubt. Going on his channel, I like dogs and I like dildos, so we're practically best mates at this point. All joking aside, I'd only heard of Rags once before the video we'll be speaking about today. I'm a bit more out of the loop of the political community than I let on, but it was when he had a Twitter account and some artists refused to do work for him because of a couple of people he was associated with. Although it's perfectly reasonable to say that it's the artist's prerogative of who they want to do the work for, it's still very personal and indicative of the state of the political community, that we really have that much passionate distaste for someone we'd rather not serve them because of their friends or opinions. I'm about to criticize Rags, maybe pretty harshly. I would still offer him the time of day because to me, content does not define the person. But as I said, that was my only experience with him, so I went into the video with a fairly fresh mind on Rags. Obviously, I had my opinions on the film. I thought it was okay. I'm probably someone who fell in the middle of the consensus. I liked some elements and hated others. I felt it was a prospectively great film that fucked up too much. Impressive but frustrating. So it understandably provoked strong feelings in a lot of viewers, particularly ones who fell on either side, because it definitely took risks. But I don't consider it bad by any means, especially considering my general standards of cinema. In I Hate Everything's video, as IHE testified, I'd conducted a comb through for any syntactic issues and made some amendments with regards to structure. I don't touch the points he actually makes, but the content didn't jump out to me as particularly provocative, and it didn't when I watched the video either. My only feedback to him at the time was that the delivery was a bit subdued, apart from the rather over-the-top segment at the end. Nonetheless, I thought it was mostly fine, not my favourite, but it didn't irritate me. Others clearly felt otherwise, Rags being one of them. From now, I will be responding to Rags' points and trying to make sense of how such points have arisen. I will disagree with Rags at multiple times throughout this video, as you will see soon, and as I actually had no plans to respond himself, I thought I'd have a crack. So without further ado, let's get to it. He opens announcing that
I Hate Everything made a really bad video, and I'm gonna respond to it because it's a really bad video.
However, before this, he precurses it with the fact that he doesn't watch much I Hate Everything at all, but he does introduce Destiny 2, which he will not be showing any clips from, but will bring the general topic up to make a similar point a fair few times throughout this video. After a few light-hearted jokes and what I assume is the intro, he gets into the arguments. Rags initiates by calling IHE a Star Wars apologist.
Oh, is that what you call yourself? You call yourself a Star Wars fan? No. You're not what I'd call a Star Wars fan. I'd call you a Star Wars apologist.
Now this is bathed in the sardonic tone pertained by a lot of these commentators, and look, the avatar is pulling his glasses down, so as not to be taken too seriously. However, this sets a precedent for a particular narrative throughout the rest of this video. So, to respond to this point quickly, IHE did not enjoy the prequels, so to imply that he is simply in love with everything Star Wars feels inaccurate. After some back and forth between these timestamps where Rags and IHE do not say anything particularly of value, other than Rags sarcastically implanting the expectation that IHE must have really hated The Last Jedi.
I really adore the original trilogy, warts and all.
Oh, so if you really like the original trilogy, then you must have really hated The Last Jedi, right?
We get this very curious comment.
Your films like, 2001: A Space Odyssey and The Deer Hunter are excellent, well-made movies. But to me at least, they're not the kind of thing that I'd throw on a cold Sunday afternoon for a bit of fun, light-hearted entertainment.
Is that what you see The Last Jedi as? Fun, lighthearted entertainment? That's fine if you do. There's nothing wrong with you considering it that. It just strikes me as odd that you would open this video by praising the original trilogy, when one of the huge reasons that people hate The Last Jedi so much is how disrespectfully it treats and tries to emulate the original trilogy.
When IHE is talking about the old Star Wars movies he'd throw on a Sunday afternoon, Rags suddenly translates this to a comment about The Last Jedi and cuts in with numerous arguments. Now when someone's doing an immediate response first time, I may understand why someone would do that, because we don't know if IHE is going to talk about The Last Jedi in respect to the old movies again in the video. However, in this instance, IHE does. And I assume Rags has watched this before because he opens it up declaring it as a bad video. He states that he would be surprised if IHE would like it as fun, light-hearted entertainment, given a lot of the fan response, and then references the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes and draws an inductive conclusion for why people didn't enjoy it.
It just strikes me as odd that you would open this video by praising the original trilogy, when one of the huge reasons that people hate The Last Jedi so much is how disrespectfully it treats and tries to emulate the original trilogy. or just straight up copy it.
I'll address this point in the near future. He then does the exact same thing again, because at this point Aichi is talking about Star Wars as a premise, and Rags is assigning this as Aichi's opinion on The Last Jedi before he's even stated his opinion. Aichi refers to Star Wars as a general concept, not as specific movies, because as stated earlier, he hates the prequels, so this run of responses just seems like a waste of time. And yes, he does go on to say that he likes The Last Jedi, but to a viewer who's never watched the source material, they would not understand this, and because you show all the source material, I assume you're trying to make this appeal to all audiences, whether they've watched the Aichi video or not. Rags then points out rightfully Aichi's comment about the death threats is unsubstantiated.
So why is it that I'm still getting death threats and hate comments because I liked The Force Awakens?
Yeah, I remember my first week on the internet. Really sorry to hear about those totally credible death threats that you got sent, Anita.
Although it's likely that you get a few when you pull that many views, but that is assumed anyway, and Aichi should have elaborated more on this. It's understood, not anything exceptional, but then Rags refers to Aichi as Anita. This is obviously talking about serial victim Anita Sarkeesian, and this is an important point that we shall hold on to, although it just seems throwaway at this moment. He then attacks Aichi as pulling the boo-hoo woe is me card.
I was going to throw my hat into the ravenous, never-ending black hole that is opinions on The Last Jedi long before this, but for too long I just felt too beat down and disappointed to say anything.
Gosh, we're pulling the boo-hoo woe is me card pretty quick, don't you think? Especially for a channel called I Hate Everything.
When really I just felt that Aichi was expressing his own problems and why he hadn't reviewed it sooner. If that's how he felt, that's how he felt. He's not asking for your sympathy. Not everyone saying that they've been feeling down is immediately doing that, especially when it's embedded within reasonable context. And the context in this is why he hasn't made a video sooner. Aichi is a YouTuber who wears his heart on his sleeve. It's not unusual of him to admit that he's emotionally vulnerable. He's done this before in his depression video, for example.
My body literally cannot take it anymore, and I feel that making a video essay explaining how anxiety affects me will not only help me cope and deal with it, but it may even help other people out there come to terms or relate or empathize on just what it can do to a person.
Now we begin a section that I probably disliked the most out of Rags' video.
I think the reaction and response to The Last Jedi is quite frankly embarrassing. And
I think the reaction and the response to Destiny 2 is quite frankly rather embarrassing.
there are a lot of people who should be ashamed for the things they've said because of a Star Wars movie.
There's a lot of people who should be ashamed for the things they said about a video game.
What kind of world are we living in where it's normal for people to send a director hate messages because they didn't like the movie they made?
Really, is this your first week on the internet? You know this happens for basically everything that has a fan base, right? I think it's strange that you've attached yourself to Star Wars in this way, that you treat it like it's some sort of a special example when really these kinds of things are everyday commonplace trivialities.
He makes this narrative equivalence towards Aichi's response to Destiny during Aichi's report on how he viewed The Last Jedi response. Not only is this accompanied by no clips whatsoever from the Destiny video, but just an image of this video within a large description. If you watched Aichi's video on Destiny, which Rags claims at the end of the video he has, you'll know that in spite of his criticisms, he's perfectly respectful. Rags assumes that Aichi is talking about any negative response rather than the brand of negative response that Aichi is referring to, which is clarified immediately after. And this is what confuses me, because Aichi qualifies these two statements in the sentence with the third, completing his narrative tripling by stating that these people are the sorts of individuals that send the director hate messages, not anything that would be endorsed by the Destiny review. Now, although Rags' point about anything with a fanbase being subject to hate messages is true on principle, there's still definitely been an exceptional vitriol to do with The Last Jedi that many fans can empathize with when Aichi expresses this. Although Aichi should have worded his point better at this moment to emphasize the magnitude of the response over the existence, I don't think there's much debate over the point that those involved with The Last Jedi have probably received significantly more hatred than most films with a fan base, and I think people understood the brand of individuals he was referring to here. Now, in light of this, Rags follows this by making a similar point.
Grow up, you pathetic children. I just think it's kind of sad that such rampant negativity can be spawned from a franchise that is all about never allowing the darkness to win and holding on to hope at all costs.
I mean, look, I just think it's kind of sad that such rampant negativity can be spawned from a series that's supposed to be about protecting the light and holding on to hope at all costs. You see what I'm doing here?
And although Aichi's point was definitely overly sentimental, there's no crossover between that and his video on Destiny 2. And even if Rags' point about Destiny 2 were as a general critique of fan response, Aichi would not endorse that mentality either, even though I would argue that fan response to The Last Jedi has been significantly more volatile than that of Destiny 2.
Yeah, I thought it sucked and I want everyone involved to die horribly.
He then tries to deconstruct Aichi's title on Destiny.
What do you mean you're done with Destiny 2? Whatever happened to holding on to hope at all costs? Whatever happened to protecting the light?
Which I assume is meant to be humorous because of all the equivalences that aren't taken into account. The difference in fan base, the difference in response, the difference in history, the difference in narrative ensued by the products. There is a unique sentimentality about the old Star Wars films in particular, around hope and such, that have not been portrayed in the Destiny games. And once again, he's not talking about The Last Jedi as a film right now, he's talking about what he perceives as the rancor within the tone of certain criticism within the response to it, not the idea of response alone.
But hey, I mean, we can't have consistency. I mean, Star Wars is a special brand. You could say it about Destiny, but you can't say it about Star Wars. It's totally different, guys.
And once again, I do not think that IHG is excusing the brand, but there has been a response to The Last Jedi, and even if there are reasonable responses too, no one's saying that they don't exist. It's just as IHG implied earlier, the vocal minority seems a lot more vocal this time round. Rags then parries IHG's point, saying that he doesn't care if you liked or disliked The Last Jedi by saying that this whole video is him whinging at people who disliked it.
Wait, you understand this video is you whinging, right? That's what this video is. It's you whinging.
And then saying that this wasn't even his biggest problem, it was more his tone, and that he should have covered The Last Jedi as a film rather than what he viewed as the irrelevant shit.
To be fair though, that's not even really my big contention with I Hate Everything's video about The Last Jedi, is that it takes the absolute worst possible way to defend something, and it makes him come across as a huge hypocrite. Maybe if you spent more time and effort actually defending the film in your video instead of lashing out against people because they had criticisms of it, ignoring the big glaring problems that people did have with the film and instead spotlighting the tiny irrelevant shit that no one cares about.
This is something that confuses me. Rags takes issue with the fact that I Hate Everything has not made this Star Wars video how Rags would like him to make it. It's essentially him criticizing IHG from an idealistic standpoint. He made a video more focused on bad fan response than the other videos, and Rags asked why he doesn't talk about the specifics more. Well, that's IHG's prerogative. He can talk about what he bloody well wants to. You're not entitled to a scene-by-scene walkthrough from every video. IHG's not avoiding anything, he's just going off what he has seen and experienced. Rags slots in this painting criticisms with broad strokes point.
Painting with far too broad a stroke people who didn't like something that you liked for no other reason than it's Star Wars and it's special to you.
He has provided no substantiation onto anywhere in this video where IHG paints people with such. In fact, IHG attempts to separate these comments throughout the video. At this point, it just seems like an attempt to position himself where he can make IHG look like an unpleasant person, so he can rain down the Rags hellfire that he probably goes out with the other less tolerant people I assume he criticizes on his channel. He then equivocates backlash with criticism.
It's perfectly within your right to feel however you want, but do you not think that the backlash is kind of massively over-exaggerated and unnecessary?
No. The Last Jedi was garbage and it deserves every ounce of criticism it receives.
And once again, that's just rather nonsensical. Now, backlash includes much more broader fields than just criticism. Then there's the use of the, oh, he's exempting it due to Star Wars, and I fail to see that point.
And don't care about it just because it has the word Star Wars slapped on the cover of it.
IHG then says,
It comes across as if a large majority of people go into these movies with the sole intention of hating them.
How could you possibly know that? Or is that shit you're just making up as an excuse to avoid actual criticisms that people make?
but he doesn't know that. And IHG's statement was premised with the fact that he doesn't know it.
We're taking it too seriously, or we're nitpicking, or we just went in wanting to hate it.
How something comes across is not knowledge, it is perception, and what will follow is an explanation of why he perceives that given the vitriol. We then go back to the avoid criticism part, which, bit of a jump, but alright mate. And then there is this 40-second segment where they're clearly arguing different points. IHG says that if people went into this movie expecting to hate it, then it is exceptionally childish. Rags then says that IHG has emotionally attached himself to a brand, and this is a point that I assume is induced from his previous arguments, but as I disagree with a few of his previous arguments, I don't see the final conclusion here. As particularly, as I said, IHG has been more than ready to criticize the prequels, which is a fair proportion of the Star Wars brand.
Did it not occur to you that maybe it would be far more wise to not instantly assume that people went into this movie expecting to hate it, and that maybe they have some serious, legitimate criticisms that you should listen to and take to heart?
And this is where the Nita thing comes back. I do not believe Rags is purposely being misleading here, but it seems he's so used to people actually behaving like that he seems to have forgotten what IHG actually said. And the point has recreated itself in his head as some sort of thing that a regressive would say, but IHG is no regressive and he would never say anything like that. He then follows this point with a point about mischaracterization, and we'll let the self-explanatory irony do the magic there.
Nah guys, haters gonna hate. That's it. They're all these haters. It's all they're doing. They're just hating.
IHG then makes a joke, believe it or not, through a voice, juxtaposing the cute kid with the aggressive vitriol.
I think the response to The Last Jedi has kind of left fans in a weird place.
Yeah, I thought it sucked and I want everyone involved to die horribly.
And Rags then reflects Aichi's point of view by voicing him.
I love The Last Jedi so much that I think it's a good idea to instantly paint the people who didn't like it as a bunch of haters.
Which I didn't care for at first, but this comes back later. Rags then makes a fair point. Aichi says that people hated The Last Jedi for some reason.
It seems to me that the accepted opinion is now that this film is really bad and it ruins Star Wars for some reason.
And obviously, Rags correctly points out,
well, if that's the accepted opinion, then maybe you should explore why people have that opinion, and you shouldn't say things like, for some reason, when the internet is full of videos and chocked with reviews of people explaining why they feel that way.
Although Aichi does finish his sentence with,
even though Star Wars was already ruined 3 times prior,
implying that he's not suggesting whether Star Wars The Last Jedi is a good or bad movie, but he's emphasizing that the franchise will likely be fine as a whole, mostly independent from your opinions on The Last Jedi. Now, if I was in Rags' position, I would also respond that The Last Jedi is in a very different place from the prequels, and that the prequels being bad films couldn't really have too much implication on the established sequence that had already been set up by the original trilogy. Therefore, it's understandable that The Last Jedi may feel like it had more of an effect on the future Star Wars films as a whole. But that's just my 2 cents on that. Rags then says that
it took years and years and years for people to turn on the prequels, and basically turn them into memes.
And although I would not agree, and I say many dislike the prequels on release, as well as the fact the critic score never really changed, I would definitely agree they're more unpopular now than they were then. Rags then, however, firstly uses Rotten Tomatoes once again to state objectively that The Last Jedi is the most unpopular Star Wars film with audiences.
The Last Jedi, and by a considerable margin, is the worst rated by audience Star Wars film that has ever existed. It took the prequels many years for people to turn on them for the films that they really were.
Despite the fact that Rotten Tomatoes in no way necessarily actually reflects universal audience sentiment on a film, particularly due to target demographics that are more likely to use the sites, and you can find other sites such as IMDb that have The Last Jedi as more popular than 2 of the 3 prequels. Now, this point would be irrelevant if the logic he followed with was correct, but he then goes on to say,
when the prequels came out, people were at least lukewarm about them, or they thought higher of them, but this is The Last Jedi after 2 months. What do you think it will be like in 2 years looking back? What do you think it'll be like 5 months from now?
Well, there are individual circumstances in which the strangely positive responses to the prequels were cultivated. In particular, they were victims of their own hype and have dated horribly. The Last Jedi doesn't appear to have that, and therefore it's unlikely that it will follow the same route. He then says,
that's kind of an odd defense of The Last Jedi, saying, oh yeah, but guys, wait, 15 years ago these other movies were bad.
And to that I'll refer you back to what I just said. Aichi's involvement of the prequels is actually justified even if the context does not hold direct comparison. Aichi then asserts,
I think discussing movies is a lot of fun. Casual debates help challenge your viewpoint and only benefit the overall landscape. But a lot of the discussions around this movie are just straight up malicious and overly simplified.
Rags then counters this by saying,
really? You think so? Because I knew I was going to do this video for quite a while, and I watched a lot of Star Wars conversations about it. I even had my own stream, and on that stream was Mahler. He ended up creating 3 extremely comprehensive videos talking about criticisms regarding The Last Jedi.
Now, Rags' point only worked if Aichi is denying the existence of a lot of reasonable discussions, which he isn't. He was just stating that a lot of these discussions appear unreasonable. You can have a lot of one and a lot of the other. They're not mutually exclusive. Rags asks him,
you say a lot of the discussion about this movie is straight up malicious and overly simplified. Can you point those out?
Listen, the mass is not hard to find. YouTube videos are not the only medium of the discussion. Let's pull up some of the examples that I gathered in around 10 minutes.
You're an idiot. The Last Jedi sucked balls. They killed Star Wars. You're a hypocritical idiot.
Your opinions suck and you should feel bad about it, X-State.
Screw you! Do you know who I am?
I feel that this review is biased.
I want to smash your head against the wall until it bleeds. You can get castrated just like this trilogy.
Idiot! Terrible plot. Thousands of plot holes. Ruined all the main characters. Social justice warrior bullshit. Terrible movie. You can try to sound intelligent with your big words, but you're fucking dumb if you think The Last Jedi was good with its plot holes, blatant agenda pushing, and its Mary Sue.
Honestly, you can just fuck off.
Wow, you're either being paid by Kathleen Kennedy or you're virtue signaling. This was a horrible movie. I only came here was to see more trashing of The Last Jedi since I'm pissed it's ruined, but you come off more of an Antifa member with talking points that makes no sense. This plot was garbage unless your IQ is 17 and you're just a moron. Hope you drop a shit ton of subs. You're an idiot if you can't criticize The Last Jedi like that and say it's a good film. Why are people enjoying things that I don't like? Die. The whole movie is SJW propaganda. There are plenty of Asian cast in Hollywood. You're out. What the fuck? Alright, I'm just not gonna read that whole fucking thing. I'm just not. I'm not reading this one either. You can just see the irony. That review is clearly SJW propaganda. You're blind. I'm an adult virgin. I can tell based on your intro alone that you're gonna be one of those cunts who defend this piece of shit film. I'm sorry, but no. You're wrong. Delete this video. I just can't stand it when people enjoy things I don't like. Again, not even gonna read this one. The irony is too powerful. Fuck you, asshole. You're a fag. And last and surely not least, the best thing to come out of this treasure trove of intelligence is Idiot Review. Wow. I'm speechless, really. I just don't know what to say.
I'd say that's a bit more than a dozen, and on top of that, Rags claims—
But I watched a lot of content in terms of people's takes and their opinions on The Last Jedi, and to paint them as overly malicious and simplistic is disingenuous from you.
when he never did that anyway. Then we go back to the Destiny point.
But a lot of the discussions around this movie are just straight up malicious and overly simplified.
You know, I think that a lot of the discussion surrounding Destiny 2 was straight up
which we've already dug into enough. I disagree with Aichi that there is no middle ground because I'm kind of on it. But his statement is a hyperbole, and as I said, the film is full of very strong sentiments which will push more people to one side or the other, and often certain extremes can frame it as there being no middle ground. And this next point is something that arises from that.
Why are you giving the people who say that any kind of attention?
Well, because they exist. That's part of the point of this video, that those people seem overrepresented in the current Star Wars discussion, and it's nauseating and unreasonable. A lot of content is built on responding to people who are being unreasonable and ridiculous. I'm sure Rags has responded to people being unreasonable and ridiculous as well. He's not premising it to say whether The Last Jedi is good or bad, he's just trying to quell the outrage, which is ironic in retrospect, questioning if it's really something worth getting to the powerful levels of anger that many have expressed. And once again, it's telling Aichi what he should be talking about. It's his fucking video. All we know is that this is a video about The Last Jedi. Then this inductive reasoning returns when Aichi says—
I've seen The Last Jedi 3 times at the cinema now. I never see anything that many times because I kind of hate going to the cinema.
And suddenly Rags puts words into his mouth.
Holy shit, he doesn't see anything that amount of times, but the Last Jedi was just so good, he did. He did see it that many times. I mean,
completely dramatizing an aside sentence from Alex, when as revealed he only watched it 3 times to get a clear grasp on how he felt. Aichi then says—
Collectively, I've seen the film with 4 different people. All of them are different levels of Star Wars fan, and all of them enjoyed it. 2 of these 4 people never go on Twitter or Reddit, so I found their reaction to be genuinely interesting.
And Rag says—
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I could have swore at the beginning of this video you were criticizing people for wanting to confirm their biases.
Which is a peculiar point, because Aichi clearly didn't select his friends to go and watch the movie based on their opinions on the movie, as they had never seen the movie when they went with him. The whole idea that Aichi made earlier of internet echo chambers is that people select who surrounds them based on pre-existing opinions. Aichi went into the movie not knowing what his friends would come out thinking, so this point just doesn't hold up. Aichi then speaks about his surface value immediate experiences with the film.
The first viewing I was genuinely unsure on my feelings, but had an overall positive outlook and vibe. The second viewing I had a much better time. The third time I just had a good experience and was never bored.
This vexes Rags, who clearly desires a more substantive argument, and maybe he spent too much time around people who, like Mauler, do scene for scene reviews. That is no discredit to Mauler, his video is a very valued take, and 5 hours of detail is highly commendable, but no one is entitled to that level of detail. It is just a selfless blessing. And on top of that, some people don't want that sort of content. We don't want a world of maulers. Some just want to hear a quick rundown, and whether you want to hear it or not, other people just want to hear someone casually expressing their opinions. People are criticizing what isn't there rather than what is from an idealistic standpoint. It's all about one's assumed expectation, and this is something that we'll talk about later with regards to The Last Jedi. I went into this video expecting I Hate Everything to talk about the film at hand, with some good production value and intriguing opinions. I got what I expected. Sure, he placed more emphasis on the response, but the response was still relative to The Last Jedi, and the midsection was still filled with his thoughts on it, so I can't really complain on that behalf. As a general premise, you draw these expectations from previous videos from the YouTuber and videos as a concept. YouTube is a very abstract platform and plenty of different content works for different people. IHG may speak more about the nitpicks, but that doesn't make his points invalid, especially as he acknowledges them as nitpicks. He never declares there to be no reasonable criticism of the film. His implication is that there is a disproportionately high amount of people overreacting to the Star Wars film. There may be reasons that explain that mentality, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there are reasons that make that mentality right. And IHG is not inherently wrong to criticize it, and I don't think it gives you a platform to be angry that he's chosen to address that. It moves towards this Puritan narrative where people say what we should be doing rather than how well we're doing it, and if he had implied that we were somehow going to get something that we subsequently didn't, then there may be cause for complaint, but he never gave you any promises. This is just his opinion. You're not entitled to too much else, especially when his feelings are based on initial viewings. You complain that his responses on his viewings are too casual, but many people don't come out of first viewings immediately with notes taken. He's expressing what he felt at the time, because that's a part of his style that a lot of people enjoy. Rags then rightfully points out that not every film is better on the second viewing, and it's not a widely accepted view as IHG says.
The second viewing, I had a much better time. It's widely accepted that the film is a lot better the second time.
Oh, is that a widely accepted thing? I had no idea, honestly.
But then somehow goes on to imply that IHG was somehow being dishonest, as people who go and watch it a second time must be only people who really like it.
I mean, I would imagine that if people really didn't like it at all, they wouldn't go and pay to see it a second time. The only people who would see it multiple times are probably people who really liked it. But okay, I guess.
Which is weird considering IHG has said he just wanted a more concise view on his feelings of the film, and there is no reason to contradict that statement whatsoever other than an attempt to present him as more biased than he actually is, so we can rain down heavier criticism on IHG. Rags then disputes IHG's point that The Last Jedi isn't a remake of The Empire by referencing an article that notes its similar plot points.
In both The Last Jedi and The Empire Strikes Back, we follow our heroes on a single ship on the run through space from the Empire or First Order's most powerful capital ships. Meanwhile, Luke and Rey are off on remote planets learning the ways of the Force from Jedi Masters who are pretty cagey about taking on new pupils at first. Both Luke
Plot
and
points
Rey
aren't
are
what
beckoned
comprise
by
a
the
film
dark
alone,
side
and
to
although I
seek
would
out
agree that there were some
Captain
similar
Cavern
narratives that ran slightly too close, I certainly wouldn't say that it can be induced that the film was just a quote remake of the other. On top of this, the article he referenced was in fact praising the movie as staying true to the original themes, and responding to criticism that it's too different. Rags even acknowledges that the structure is similar,
I mean, the structure is really similar.
but a film doesn't require just structure to qualify as a remake. Then there's just some pointless back and forth. IHG says,
But at the very least, you have to admit this is something new for the franchise. No one saw this story coming.
the film gave us something different, and Rags takes advantage of the low-hanging fruit to express his disappointments with the film.
I mean, people expected things to be done, characters to be expanded upon, relationships to be made, arcs to be developed, rivalries to be fostered, some cool, interesting information that maybe was a callback to something that we might have previously been hinted about, but no, there was none of that.
And even if you hate The Last Jedi with every bone in your body, that's quite a high claim. There's some more complaints from Rags about how he hasn't spoken about the film yet. For perspective, we would be 4 minutes into IHG's video. That's not a particularly long introduction segment for an approximately 20-minute video. It's just long when you interject in every fucking sentence. Rags is then annoyed that IHG explained his cinema experience rather than a formal review.
Alright, you said you were going to talk about your thoughts about the movie, but you said so little. What do you expect for us to take away?
In spite of the fact that we're around 4.5 minutes in, and he will later embellish these narratives. Once again, that's IHG's style. IHG then says,
I'd like to think people who genuinely hate Star Wars wouldn't waste their time going to see it.
Rags points out this earlier statement and seems to imply that this might contradict it.
Well, you clearly think that they did, based on what you said at the beginning of this video.
But it does not. Let's put the two sentences together. It comes across as if some people go into the movie expecting to hate it, although I would like to think the people who genuinely hate Star Wars wouldn't. They're not contradictions as they're both built on conditions. IHG then expresses that he is a
Fan of movies first, and a fan of Star Wars secondly.
Rags acknowledges this and expresses his own feelings on it.
Well, that makes a little bit of sense. I felt like Rian Johnson was giving Star Wars the middle finger,
seemingly positioning himself as a Star Wars fan first. IHG then
I
says,
think this perspective is important because I feel like I, and many others, are looking at this movie in a totally different lens to a lot of other people.
and Rags strawmans this on the basis of his earlier statements about how IHG must have only liked the pretty visuals and nothing else.
You wanted to see pretty graphics, and it has Star Wars in it, so it must be good. Gotcha.
IHG then says,
Mostly the self-proclaimed true Star Wars fans.
If you are a true Star Wars fan, you'd hate what this movie did.
I see so many comments exclaim.
Yeah, it's silly for people on the internet to decide who and who isn't a true fan of something.
which once again rags questions.
Yeah, it's silly for people on the internet to decide who and who isn't a true fan of something. Again, why are you finding these comments?
Well, because firstly they're significant enough to pay time to, and secondly because he chose to. It feels like Rags is annoyed at having to agree with him, so he has to take issue even when there isn't one. He then states,
Which you yourself try to paint as irrelevant and not worthy of your time,
when from my perspective, it was just a joke. He then claims,
even though you address these kinds of things so much in this video instead of the actual criticisms of the movie.
as if his video, which is initiating discussion on a general topic and highlighting the toxicity of debates, is meant to address every single last criticism. Rags once again seems to think that these comments are either uncommon or non-existent. Rags then says IHG is avoiding things that should be talked about.
You are clearly avoiding things that should be talked about.
It's Star Wars, not a fucking missile crisis. Who are you to decide what should and should not be talked about? If you want to hear someone talk about a film more in depth, then go and watch another video. You can't dictate what their topic should be. You can discuss their execution all you want, but there is a difference. He has never declared this as an in-depth review. Not everything he does on his channel is a review, and not everyone who is subscribed for the reviews. Looking at recent releases, Hunt Down the Freeman was just a discussion. YouTube in the News was a thought piece. The only things that are always actual reviews are his Search for the Worst series, and even then he doesn't discuss every element. His channel doesn't take these topics too seriously. The title suggests that it's I Hate Everything and he talks about The Last Jedi. That's pretty much what you got, whether you like it or not. If he'd presented this as an in-depth critique, maybe your qualms would be more justified, but I beckon you to find where he premised that. Rags then talks about this brand movie distinction in response to IHG's facetious claim that no one hates Star Wars more than Star Wars fans, referencing Mauler's theory.
I guess it is true that no one quite hates Star Wars as much as Star Wars fans.
Mahler, who I spoke of earlier, wrapped up his trilogy of criticism videos on The Last Jedi with this message. It seems very appropriate here.
Ultimately, Star Wars as a movie made people fall in love with a fictional world and its characters. As a byproduct, they fell in love with a brand. That brand lives on today. And now, Star Wars as a brand is making people fall in love with the movies in a most shallow and empty way. It doesn't matter what it is anymore, just as long as it's called Star Wars.
Which, as a theory, must I say, is a damn interesting one, but a theory nonetheless. Unless you present empirical studies to back it up, that's all it will ever be. However, it doesn't seem particularly relevant from my point of view. As I said, I do not think that IHG is in love with the brand from what has been witnessed, and it being used in this way just seems like a technique to gaslight his opinions before they've even been stated. Then IHG uses a Mark Hamill quote,
"It's only a movie. And if you think you're going to go into the movie and recapture your childhood, you're setting yourself up for disappointment."
Which once again is summing up the message of his video, the sort of don't take it too seriously guys. Rags responds this with an onslaught of Mark Hamill interviews where he expressed doubt.
Oh, you're gonna bring Mark Hamill into this, huh? Okay.
And listen, Hamill's character missed the mark for me on premise. However, most of these interviews followed through with context that Hamill was actually quite happy with the final product and that he did accept it, even if he initially objected to it. And I think development of such is very interesting, so to frame it as just Hamill unequivocally hating it is kinda undermining the actual complexity in his thoughts. The interviews with him are very interesting. Rags then asks if it's a mistake that YouTube's search box feels that Mark Hamill hates The Last Jedi.
Do you think it is a mistake for YouTube's algorithm to go ahead and autofill Mark Hamill to Mark Hamill hates The Last Jedi?
But the search box is much more based on popular demand, what people think rather than what Mark Hamill thinks himself. From the whole interviews that I've seen, he genuinely seems passionate about the movie, and I think him stating his apprehensions just makes it seem more real, and it's a shame that he's had to apologise for something that he shouldn't apologise for. I'll link lots of interviews in the description below which have him expressing everything, good to bad. It's honestly really cool to see him be so upfront, and although I agree with Rags that he is a gem, I would not say that he hates it. On top of that, I would not look that deeply into the clip that IHG plays, other than to reflect the message of IHG's video rather harmlessly. It's not that deep. Then Rags turns Aichi's narrative on him. He encourages Aichi to tell Mark Hamill what Aichi tells Rags and those who dislike the film. That A, he's taking it too seriously.
We're taking it too seriously.
B, he's nitpicking.
We're nitpicking.
C, he went in expecting to hate it.
Or we just went in wanting to hate it.
And D, that he should shut up and enjoy the spectacle.
Why can't you just shut up, Mark, and enjoy the spectacle?
Okay. There is a curbed fury to these lines that would provoke a viewer. However, Rags has employed a few tricks, which I don't think are done out of naivety in this instance. Firstly, he loads his statement with the presupposition that Aichi has been telling him and those who dislike the film the following statements, which, as we've addressed, is not the case. He's addressing the toxic side of the debate. Rags then gradually escalates each statement to the point that none of these things are remotely applicable beyond the first one, the one that Mark Hamill was saying himself anyway, and the last one being outright ridiculous. He has not once said that he should shut up and enjoy the spectacle. What a joke. Rags then summarizes his thoughts on a conceptual basis before pointing us towards Mauler's more in-depth video.
I will say that with the utmost confidence of all of the criticisms, reviews, and commentaries that I've watched within the last 2 months span, that Star Wars The Last Jedi is one of the worst constructed films I have ever seen, even though it might not have been obvious right off the bat. Once more, I cannot stress enough how informative and in-depth the criticisms made by Mauler are of this film. There are so many. If it took him 4.5, 5 hours to talk about them all, there is no way I could possibly and realistically do them justice here.
And then we get this subjective, objective value argument.
Media can be bad in subjective ways, but it can be bad in objective ways that can be measured, discussed, and explained. And you can quote me on this because I stand by it 110%. The Last Jedi is an objectively poorly made film. Ugh.
The objective value argument was originally hypothesized in Mauler's content, so if Rags can bring in a friend, so can I. And let me tell you, I know you're gonna love who I'm about to introduce. Someone who, although I disagree with fairly clearly on The Last Jedi, which, disclaimer, we're gonna disagree with in this following section, I consider a friend nonetheless, who's always helped me out and involved me with his writing process. Let's bring him in.
Hi, I'm Quinn Reviews, and this is a copy of Citizen Kane. Oh my god, I'm so sorry! Some months ago, I reviewed The Last Jedi on my own channel and basically said that I thoroughly enjoyed it. After this, I received a barrage of strangely personal comments from people who hated the movie, and more importantly, hated people who liked the movie. And in response to this, I decided to make a parody video making fun of some of those comments, and in that video, I included references to the work of Mauler. I was then invited to a debate with Mauler, and in preparation for this, I decided to watch all 5 hours of his Last Jedi criticism video. And I found that experience to be heavily disagreeable. Not something that I found any relation to whatsoever. And the thing is, I'm not sure that that's inherently that much of a bad thing. A review is nothing more than a description of an experience. This dates back all the way to when a review spoke of plays and concerts instead of DVDs and Blu-rays, and with this being the case, it's only natural that from person to person, the descriptions of these experiences are going to be different. Art is not a science. There is no means to universally or factually prove worth. And arguably that is why art has any value in the first place. But here lies the issue. The Right Opinion and I would not be discussing Rags' video if the issue at hand was just that he doesn't like The Last Jedi and other people do. The problem is that his thesis statement is essentially that other people are not allowed to disagree with his opinion, because his opinion is on a higher playing field than everyone else's. Or to put it like he likes to, his opinions are objective, and the opinions of people who disagree with him, well, those are just subjective.
And you can quote me on this because I stand by it 110%. The Last Jedi is an objectively poorly made film.
Before moving any forwards, we have to acknowledge something which might not be inherently obvious if you don't know a lot about these two YouTubers. That being that most of this video created by Rags is in fact paraphrasing a video made by his apparent best friend, Mahler. Thus, to fully understand what Rags is even trying to say about The Last Jedi, and also what he's trying to say about the nature of opinions, we are going to have to sample brief clips from Mahler's equivalent video discussing the exact same points.
Well, I hate to break this to you, my precious audience, but if you watch my other work, I am one of the people on the internet who will tell you and simultaneously argue to the death that there is such a thing as objective value to content.
Media can be bad in subjective ways, but it can be bad in objective ways that can be measured, discussed, and explained.
Star Wars The Last Jedi is objectively bad content. It is provable. This is factual. You love the themes? That's nice, but the film is still horribly written, meaning that the value you have defined from the project itself is simply for you. It is not measurable or provable. In fact, when put under a lens, it is the opposite.
If we refer to logic and argumentation, for something to be objective, one conclusion can only be drawn. You can derive objective value in some instances where there are few conditions and you realize that you can account for them. However, with a film, for a statement to be objective, you must have counted for every single premise in existence, to the point where you can listen to every argument and still draw the same conclusions. There are some things about film that may be objective, but if you're making a general statement on whether it is good or bad, I do not like to say that is impossible, but you're pushing the limits there. Even Mahler's in-depth 5-hour video does not begin to account for the numerous conditions, opinions, and further perceptions, and even responses to his individual points. The best this theory can do is pedestal the opinions of those who look to be backed up. Your conclusion may be that it is bad, but that is based on your premises, and different people have different premises, different emphasis on topics, and different standards. What even is good and bad? They're vague, subjective concepts in themselves. You would have to put yourself on every single little spectrum pertaining to an individual and explain why it is bad on that spectrum. All you've done is explain why it is bad on your spectrum. Even if your logic is valid, you have not proved it to be tautologous, and thus not objective.
So the question becomes, to Mahler and Rags, what are objective values? And more importantly, what are subjective values, and why are they factually worse? Well, as he's explained through numerous comments and in numerous videos, objective values are things that are measurable, discussable, and provable, and subjective values are things like if you like the themes, or if the movie looks good because that costs money, and basically anything that he would call an opinion.
Everything positive said about the film is either about the superficial elements that take money to generate.
The film is visually stunning and creative.
Disney has lots of money. Got it.
Very tastefully achieved and obviously had a lot of care and thought put into them.
Yes, Disney has money.
All the subjective arguments that stem from themes to interpretations to feelings. The vast majority of my points aren't about perspective, we are talking about facts. And if you don't want to agree with them, then it will be difficult to have discussions in the future because this is precisely how one creates a scale and moves on from it. If you think The Last Jedi is great, good luck ever calling other films bad.
I hope that you can understand why this perspective, which might initially seem unimportant when described in a flat nature, is the base issue with all 6 hours of Rags and Mahler's videos about The Last Jedi. To state that your opinions, which mostly come down to things like thoughts about the lore and nitpicks about dialogue, are objective facts that can never be disputed by anyone, is ridiculous. Let us compare and contrast. If you go to I Hate Everything and you tell him, I disagreed with your video, I didn't like your video, and I hated The Last Jedi, he will at least be sensible enough to tell you, that's just a difference of opinion, and it's only natural.
For the record, I think all those things are fair to criticize the film for, if you truly feel that way. I feel how I feel, and you feel how you feel. Get over it.
But if you go to Mahler and or Rags and tell them that you disagree with their videos and that you actually loved The Last Jedi, you will get comments like this. The vast majority of my points are not about perspective, we are talking about facts. I am seriously doubting your capacity to understand quality. And of course, my personal favorite, if you like The Last Jedi, good luck calling other films bad.
The vast majority of my points aren't about perspective, we're talking about facts.
I am seriously doubting your capacity to understand quality.
If you think The Last Jedi is great, good luck ever calling other films bad.
This thesis statement, in my subjective opinion, is inherently toxic. There is no logic to how this is constructed, there is no consistency to when an opinion is or is not measurable, and overall it is just a measly podium constructed by these two to insist to their audience that their opinions are universally better than everyone else's. This might seem blunt or crude, but the ultimate issue to me is that Mahler and Rags believe that they are part of a battlefield fighting their holy and protected beliefs. Socially, they use their flawed thesis to justify the fact that they believe themselves to be warriors. You two are not warriors. None of us are warriors. We are geeks online that talk about films. Stop acting like you are warriors. Basically, as someone who knows more about Star Wars than the right opinion, it is going to be my job in this video to disagree with some of Rags' points about Star Wars, the lore, the universe, etc. Not because there is any factual basis to the fact that he is 100% wrong, and not because he is a bad person for having opinions that I disagree with, but because I am basically having to prove that his opinions are not universally measurable, are not ultimately 100% provable, and are certainly not anything resembling objective.
I've seen many people say something along the lines of, it's a well-made movie, it's just a bad Star Wars movie, which you can't really argue with.
Which Rags disputes as he believes that it is both.
Well, they would only be half right, because The Last Jedi is a poorly made movie. Also, it is a bad Star Wars movie as well.
IHE follows this by saying that he's seen a lot of criticisms that are not real criticisms.
But what is really bothering me about this entire conversation is that a lot of criticisms for this movie are not actually criticisms at all.
Oh. Now we're just putting criticisms up in quotes. Okay.
He then proceeds to address this, citing an example where someone said that it was a bad movie because they didn't use the Wilhelm scream in it.
I genuinely saw a comment whinging about The Last Jedi being a bad movie simply because they didn't use the Wilhelm scream sound effect. Yeah, that really makes the film bad, doesn't it?
Wait, you understand this video is you whinging, right? That's what this video is. It's you whinging.
As previously, Rags gets annoyed and asks why he's talking about such statements.
Why are you giving these stupid, idiotic things attention and time?
We've had this discussion before. He's talking about them because they're mildly interesting points that exemplify the exaggerated reaction. He then in turn gets angry about why he hasn't addressed the real criticisms.
How come you have not yet to these stupid, insipid, vacuous, empty, pointless, completely
and we've already spoken about that too. Then a very special moment occurs, which has confused me to this day. IG's comments about people complaining about science in a Star Wars movie, and this is followed by Rags stating that he doesn't understand why, quote, you think, I assume you being IHE, things need explanations to be sensical.
Have you been paying attention to this franchise at all? None of it makes any sense, and that's entirely by design.
Huh? Disappointed by lack of science, Star Wars?
While the absolutely retarded design of the bombers at the beginning of The Last Jedi is not a particularly good example for gravity, I don't understand why you think things have to have explanations in order for them to be considered sensical.
But then saying that it's a fair criticism why people should be concerned.
It is by no means a poor criticism for people to ask themselves why very basic tenets of something do not apply to the rules of reality or the rules that have been pre-established in a universe.
I then assume, retrospectively, that he means you as general, but the way he delivered it and the tone implied a sentiment of specificity towards IHE, as if he was refuting something and then he realized he was making the wrong point. Either way, it was rather bemusing. Now, whether the criticism is valid or not, I think it's fair to say that a few gravity-related incidents are not a big deal. We're not saying the whole concept of gravity was completely done wrong, it was clearly done on schemas that we're all familiar with. He was addressing someone who took issue with a specific scenario to do with gravity. I don't know about you, but I can see why that is perceived as nitpicking.
Rags admits in this video that he recorded this whole thing live without a script, and the way he did it basically was he would play a brief clip of I Hate Everything saying something, and then he would respond to it live. This is an inherently flawed system. Rags will play one sentence of I Hate Everything's video at a time, sometimes less, and then he will respond to that clip for minutes on end, and it gets to the point that he has failed so heavily to connect one sentence to the next that he stops even fully understanding what Alex is trying to say in the first place. Through this system, he obviously has no capacity to understand rhetorical statements, for instance.
But a lot of the discussions around this movie are just straight up malicious and overly simplified. You have two choices. You can either really love it or think it's the worst film ever made.
Are those the only two options? There's no middle ground? Really?
Whenever Alex will do something like apply criticism of The Last Jedi to the original trilogy, Rags' response is to defend the original trilogy and then to act as if Alex is saying that because the original trilogy is bad, The Last Jedi is better in comparison. And it gets to the point that Rags just starts arguing I hate everything's point for him?
Don't even get me started on how Luke and Leia can all of a sudden read each other's minds. Bad writing alert! Bad writing!
Let me get this straight. So, Leia is Force sensitive, and she can sense other Force sensitive people. That's bad writing.
Duck season! Wabbit season! Wabbit season! Duck season! Fire!
Then we get to the point where Aichi refers back to what he considers to be the nitpicks.
You know, it might even be YouTube channels like mine, or more likely channels like CinemaSins, that have created this new standard and expectation for what film criticism actually is.
Rags then interjects and says,
"Do not give yourself that much credit. You are going out of your way to avoid the many legitimate criticisms of The Last Jedi."
You can see that Rags and Aichi are not on the same wavelength of what they want to discuss. There are legitimate criticisms of The Last Jedi, there are nitpicks, and the only thing that Aichi is trying to assert is that the nitpicking seems to be more common in this movie than the previous ones. If you disagree with that, then that is fine, but you are not entitled to a formal debate of all the intricate points because his video would go on just as long as yours, and that's not what he or the fanbase enjoys. Aichi then says,
"Nitpicking a film to the point where you're purposefully ignoring the context and intent isn't helpful to anyone."
Rag then orders him to
tell that to CinemaSins. You just brought their name up, so it seemed appropriate.
As if CinemaSins would take offense, but CinemaSins do it for a joke. They continuously have to tell their own fans not to take their videos seriously because they are, by nature, not a legitimate analysis. This is a channel that seeks out the inclusion of people eating apples as tallies against the film. They are not acting this way with serious intent. Rags then tries to use the fact that Aichi notes that he goes into arguably too much detail as some sort of equivalence.
The description of your Destiny 2 review reads, IHE goes into arguably too much detail on Bungie's new entry in the hugely popular Destiny franchise. You made a 49-minute video review of Destiny 2 where you admit to being nitpicky about it, and countless hours must have been spent editing, compiling all of that footage, putting your thoughts together, and making those into a movie.
But if you watch the Destiny 2 video for his evaluation, he takes into account the context and intent that he says is being ignored in this video. Nitpicking for fun is fine. I don't think many are going to dispute that, as long as you come to a conclusion that doesn't rely on them alone.
I would love to know why your nitpicking of Destiny 2 is completely justified, but anybody else's criticism of a movie that you liked is absolutely not helpful, unacceptable, not constructive. A casual observer might perhaps call you a hypocrite for saying such things.
Just because something is long doesn't mean that it preoccupies itself with only nitpicks. And furthermore, the length of something does not imply higher quality. Just because two videos are equally long does not mean they are both equal in content. Rags then says that Aichi's point of view is that
anybody else's criticism of a movie that you liked is absolutely not helpful, unacceptable.
Which is once again not true. A casual observer may call Aichi a hypocrite. I will not for this at least. Aichi then says that
yeah, it may be funny, but that doesn't mean it's helpful criticism. And over the past year I've become increasingly more aware of this. I'm trying to make it more clear that what I say is just my opinion, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's the correct opinion.
Rags responds saying that this comment is irrelevant because of the way he paints his opposition's opinion.
You're the one who's painting the opposition in terms of these criticisms to the lowest possible level of legitimacy and leaving it that.
I Hate Everything never attempted to paint the whole of the opposition's opinion. It just seems like Rags' culminating outrage where there isn't really potential for anything. Aichi himself is just too timid. He's only painting the ridiculous criticisms as ridiculous criticisms and using it to highlight how certain elements of the discourse have become marked. Then there's this little cut with Aichi's intro screen in the bin in response to Aichi's comment towards others shielding themselves with satire. It's hard to say much about that. Aichi then says,
I liked The Last Jedi. Get over it.
Rags manages to turn this into a point as if Aichi was preemptively addressing Rags, saying that
I'm not staying up making this video response because you like The Last Jedi. I'm making it because of the attitude in which you approach criticism.
Following his point with numerous justifications that I've already addressed, and that is fine, he has presupposed them from earlier. Bias, painting the opposition, etc, etc, etc. Aichi wasn't talking to him though. Now we get to where Aichi expresses what he liked about the film. He begins with the production, value, visual effects, cinematography, and acting. Rag strikes the first two off by saying,
so Disney has lots of money. Got it.
He doesn't address the cinematography at this point and states that crediting the acting as brilliant is setting the bar kind of low. Now the latter two aren't really debatable, as Rags didn't address the cinematography yet and subjectively disputed the other. However, the Disney has money point is a curious one. Plenty of films have large budgets, some films succeed visually, others fail. Something could still be perceived as visually good regardless of how much money went into it, saying that Disney has money as a means to seemingly undermine praise of a film. If every film that existed and had money involved with was visually good, maybe you could set a standard, but visuals are still a fairly mixed bag. They are not presumed when going into the cinema. Money would maybe make it more of a feat on a proportional basis, more impressive in a way, but if someone does no revision and gets the same mark as someone who does a lot of revision, it's still the same mark.
To say that the only thing that could lead to a movie being stunning is that they had the budget for it is amazingly condescending, especially considering that movies like Suicide Squad, a lot of the Marvel films, and even The Force Awakens failed to look nearly as good as The Last Jedi. If there are movies in existence that have come out recently that have had huge budgets and have not looked good, then you cannot come out and say that The Last Jedi looking good just comes down to money and it shouldn't be counted as a positive. That's stupid.
Aichi then says,
Kylo Ren is probably the most interesting character in this entire franchise now.
Rags doesn't dispute that, but asserts that he's the only interesting character. Then there's this back and forth, which isn't really mine to dictate. I'm not here to dispute the opinions themselves too much, though I will obviously state them. Rags expresses that he feels that
the military and strategic incompetence of the First Order actually gave me no sense of tension like I had in the original trilogy. I never felt afraid for our characters. I never felt afraid for Rey because she's a Mary Sue and she'll excel and surpass anything that should be expected of a character like her in every scenario.
Which is fine. He then states that although the fights were visually appealing, that Disney has money. Then we discuss cinematography once more, and Rags does agree that the cinematography was good. He just asserts that Rian Johnson needs to stay away from everything else. I Hate Everything explains why he loved the music score and clearly feels very passionately about it. As someone who is a big fan of scores myself, I can definitely relate. However, Rags' only comment is that
I don't remember any of the music from this film.
That's all. Aichi then praises the visual effects, which Rags uses the Disney has money point again, which once again, money does not guarantee good visuals. You only have to look at some of the criticism Black Panther, an equally budgeted blockbuster, received for its CG, to know that money in film doesn't always equal visual quality. It's not assumed, not from my perspective at least. But really this outlines a fundamental difference. Although Rags is attempting to excuse what Aichi likes, he's not really arguing that much, and this just shows that people have different ideas of what they expect cinema to be, and have different areas of interest to what composes a good film, and what may make one person happy won't necessarily make another. Even if it's the same content, you can break down so many things that may not work for you, but it doesn't necessarily contradict what may work for someone else. Aichi then says,
enjoyed the themes of learning through failure, even if some characters are thrown to the side for the sake of reinforcing that point.
Rags takes this point and suggests that Luke Skywalker shouldn't have been one of them, and as well as Admiral Akbar. Then there's the Mark Hamill thing again, and Aichi and Rags clearly disagree on this point. Rags can't be emotionally invested, and that's fair enough, it's his opinion. Aichi makes a nudge towards a certain character that some have called pointless.
I think the way the film culminates with the three different plot lines all coming together at once is extremely well executed and genuinely thrilling and exciting, even if what it took to get there had some bumpy moments.
Rags embellishes this, stating,
it's almost as if you understand there are extremely legitimate criticisms people have of this film.
And that's the thing, he completely does. His previous points were not to suggest that there weren't. He just felt that there were too many points of worthlessness or toxicity as well. There is no denial of legitimate criticisms, just an observation that maybe some criticisms are a bit unnecessary for a film that's ingrained in the Star Wars movies. And regardless of what you think about The Last Jedi, there's nothing inherently unfair about that. Aichi states that he personally thought Mark Hamill's art was very satisfying, and although I never personally agreed with the jolting introduction, I can understand that from the premise what followed wasn't unreasonable to viewers. Rags responds to this suggesting he could play more Mark Hamill footage, which doesn't really change the point. What Mark Hamill thought doesn't necessarily challenge the validity of what someone else thought.
So this part is pretty important, I think. I Hate Everything says that he didn't really have a problem with how the Force was used in The Last Jedi, and that he didn't agree with how a lot of the fans have said that it wasn't done right. And Rags interprets this as a personal attack on the fans?
Didn't have a problem with the way the Force was used, like a lot of fans do.
Yeah, those pesky fans.
Which no, dude, he's just disagreeing with them. Calm down. Rags then begins to lay down this idea that The Last Jedi is bad because it, quote, fucks up the lore? Now, first of all, I think most people would find it entirely reasonable to debate if the lore is even important to if the movie is good or not. But let's just try to ignore this for now, because Rags doesn't even really prove that the movie does fuck up the lore. His key example for this is the sequence where Yoda shows up at the end of the film as a Force ghost. Mahler and Rags both bring up 3 main points about this. The first being that Yoda should have appeared earlier in the movie, and indeed during the events of the flashbacks.
Yoda, who conveniently has showed up 30 years after Luke has decided to crash himself here. Gee, thanks a lot, Yoda. Thanks for waiting 30 years.
This also raises the question of where has Yoda been while Luke has been spiraling into this new and interesting character over 30 years, especially if it took one sentence to bring him back from his perspective. Where was Yoda when Kylo was created? Where were any of the Force ghosts?
The answer is that, for one, Luke spends most of the movie cut off from the Force, and for 2, this is explained in Episode 5.
If you choose to face Vader, you will do it alone. I cannot interfere.
Now you can try and speculate over why they couldn't appear in this one sequence, but none of that's ever really clarified, it's just your fan speculation. So all we really know is that in this situation, they couldn't appear. Now if you want to try and argue that this isn't a good enough explanation, that's entirely your right, but if you're arguing it specifically in the context of Episode 8, that's strange to me. Because to me, if this is good enough for Episode 5, then it should be good enough for the entire franchise. I don't know why we would be cherry-picking in this one situation. Before we go any further, I want to point out something inherently contradictory. In the opening minutes of his video, Rags directly attacks I Hate Everything for having an attachment to Star Wars.
Looks to me like you've got quite an emotional attachment to Star Wars. I just hope I never irrationally attach myself to something like you've done to Star Wars. What's pathetic, and what's childish, is you having emotionally attached yourself to a brand.
But throughout his own video, he discusses why he views the movie to be bad through the lens of someone who is upset that their attachment to the characters, the universe, and the story has been disconnected.
Rian Johnson laughs at your concept of being attached to characters, and it shows a direct disdain for the established lore of the Star Wars universe that many people respect. Not to mention the complete disrespect to the lore and invention of series-altering mechanics. I don't even know if I'd consider myself a Star Wars fan anymore. This may have killed it for me. Why should I care anymore? People who want to see Luke being a badass like he was in the original trilogy, he earned his badassery.
If you think that Alex's opinion is invalid because he's just a Star Wars fanboy who has an attachment to the franchise, to then turn around and say that because you used to be a Star Wars fanboy and you once had an attachment to the franchise, your opinion is better than his? That just seems mean-spirited and hypocritical. By the way, at this point I'm arguing as a fan and not as a critic, and I think that says a lot. Rags then goes on to say that The Last Jedi adds information about the Force ghosts, and thus it's bad. He starts off with the fact that Luke gets hit on the head by Yoda's cane. No! And this means the Force ghosts can touch things, and thus it's a retcon. Well, except for the fact that Force ghosts are constantly sitting on things, leaning on things, making noises while they walk through grass. So that point is immediately debunked. He then brings up the fact that Yoda, as a Force ghost, can now use lightning. And this fucks up the lore.
I trust you don't have to think long about how much this fucks up the lore.
Does it, though? It doesn't. For one, in what situation have we seen the Force ghosts in before where they would do something like this? They usually just appear to 1 or 2 people. They can't appear during confrontation. This is essentially the first time where it would have made sense for them to do this, ever. For 2, Force ghosts are constantly said to be part of the living Force. Every time a character dies in the Star Wars universe, someone says some shit like, one with the Force they are now! It is not insane to me, or an inherent contradiction, that Force ghosts, part of the actual Force, could make a bolt of lightning come down. Earlier in the video, I Hate Everything made a pretty good case for why he didn't agree with these very points. But Rags was playing so little of the video at once that he failed to understand what Alex was trying to say. So I will now try and explain why I disagree in my own way. Most of the complaints about the Force and the canon in Episode 8 comes down to a sentiment along the lines of, if it didn't happen in Episodes 1 through 6, then it can't happen now. I find this to be an entirely unreasonable standard. what force powers existed in Episode 4? The answer is Obi-Wan doing the whole
"These aren't the droids you're looking for"
mind trick thing, and Darth Vader choking someone from a distance. The film shows a confrontation between the two mightiest Force users in the galaxy, and both of them use 0 Force powers in the battle, and the Force in practice is rarely demonstrated in the film itself. Over the years since Episode 4, numerous Force powers have been retconned into existence. These include levitating or pulling something without physical touch, using the Force to jump higher, using the Force to summon lightning to your fingertips, using the Force to talk to someone from a distance away, using the Force to appear as a fucking ghost, and using the Force to push things. Even by the time that Episodes 2 and 3 came out, the Force powers that existed within the Star Wars universe were still being invented and expanded upon. So what that means is that when you watch the films in any basic chronological order, they don't make any sense because half of the Force powers stop existing after Rogue One. I have to bring this up because in his video, Rag says that Luke and Kylo not using Force powers against each other in their battle is a contradiction.
Also, I noticed the lack of Force powers in that fight.
But that's only true under the standards of the prequels, because there are numerous lightsaber battles in the original trilogy that use no Force powers. You are using a standard for this film that has not been applied to any other Star Wars movie before this. Now, some of you are likely going to argue that we do understand all of these powers, that we've seen them used in practice, and that they've been expanded upon in the lore. But that's only true because in the past 40 years, these films have been worshipped and expanded upon. When Episode 5 came out, no one knew what that junk meant. No one had explanations about midichlorians and training. It was just gobbledygook. Even Luke and Leia being siblings and Leia being able to use the Force are things that were invented late into the production of Episode 6. So if you have to use that last-minute Episode 6 context to explain Episode 5, then you're admitting that Episode 5 wasn't universally agreeable and explained upon in the first place. And again, when I am criticizing the previous Star Wars films for not having a consistency to a movie that came out in 1977, I am not legitimately saying that those movies are bad. I am simply applying the standard used on The Last Jedi to the other films to prove a point. Oh, and while we're on this subject, Force projection was in Rebels, so you can just hop off that fucking high horse.
IHG then states that he thinks the Force is a reasonable extension. Rags mistakes this as a comment about Luke, so I can't really respond to a misunderstanding, but it is an impressive rant, so fair play. Now this is where we bring the voice point back. Rags calls out IHG.
Okay, this thing you're doing with the voices, you need to stop. It makes you look like a fucking prick.
This would be fine if Rags hadn't done the exact same thing earlier. And to those who might say, well, he was doing it in response to IHG's voice in the first place, the first time round IHG did it was clearly a joke.
Yeah, I thought it sucked and I want everyone involved to die horribly.
Whether you find that funny or not, its intent was very clear. Unless we're in Scotland, you can't lock anyone up for that. Rags' IHG impression was an extension onto that joke in which he attacked IHG's viewpoint. So forgive me if I find that Rags does not have the high ground to criticize IHG from at this point in time. However, Rags follows this with a passionate rant about how he's doing it because he's so angry at other opinions.
Somebody on the internet is criticizing something that you like, and you can't stand that. It makes you upset. It makes your blood boil. You just can't take it. Somebody doesn't like the thing that you really like, and for whatever reason, you have attached yourself to it emotionally that you see an attack on it as an attack on you.
I mean, if we're going off that logic, then a lot of people would fit the prerequisite for outrage. It just seems like a dramatic piece to paint IHG, the very mellow, relaxed person with an opinion, as some raging SJW. It doesn't work, not for me at least. There's not one moment for me where IHG comes across as the criticisms of Star Wars are seen as an attack on him. It's just purposely provocative rhetoric from Rags. Rags then lists his general problems, and they are perfectly legitimate, and not ones that we can really break down when they're spoken about so generally. But IHG felt differently. These points are both fair enough. At this point, I'm sick of the Star Wars brand argument.
Leia and Rey are shown to be extremely powerful and established Force users, despite their blatant lack of training on the subject. It brings up questions and inconsistencies that deserve answers from people who care about the universe and don't care about it just because it has the word Star Wars slapped on the cover of it.
There's been no evidence to suggest that just because he is attached to Star Wars as a concept somehow means he can't think about this film rationally. That general point of irrational attachment to the brand was presupposed at the start, where he called him a Star Wars apologist, and it's just been shoehorned in throughout this video despite his numerous criticisms of the prequels. IHG then says there is obvious foreshadowing.
Well, apart from the very very obvious setup and foreshadowing that's all over the film.
Raj challenges on this, beckoning an explanation, and that is fair enough. I'm sure it wouldn't have taken that long for Aichi to explain the obvious foreshadowing in reference.
Can you please point to the foreshadowing scene where Leia is an established Force user to the point where she can save herself and then float through the vacuum of space in order to save herself?
You have a power I don't understand and could never have.
You're wrong, Leia. You have that power too. In time, you'll learn to use it as I have.
Arguably, if we had gotten to the end of her use in the sequel trilogy and Leia hadn't used the Force, that would have been an inherent contradiction, because there's an entire scene in Episode 6 just setting up the fact that in the future she will be able to use the Force. You can say the scene is goofy, you can call it Mary Poppins-esque, you can say it looks bad, but you can't say it contradicts the lore, because it doesn't.
From now on, there is a lot of back and forth, and the discussion just makes you forget what the original point was. Aichi was responding to an argument that the lack of explanation from the Force had ruined it.
Since when has Star Wars ever established a Force power before just doing it? Yeah, I totally remember the exposition from Obi-Wan explaining how the mind trick works.
Now, there are obviously tiers of Force usage in their extremity, and some that may require more explanation than others. This is a fair point to observe. There is no real problem with this argument. If you wanted more explanation, then that is fair enough. Some people just didn't view it as a necessity, although I personally think that there were elements that could have used a bit more, such as Leia's use of the Force in space. Not to detract from the good old banter, Rags gets a sick burn in with the lads saying that
I can see why Mahler didn't want to do a response video to this.
Because Mahler is above such immature child's play. The god, the man, the Mahler. And if we set the snide comments aside, there are some arguments in this section that are relevant. In fact, there are some very good points regards to Force equivalences made. There is a spectrum of Force extensions, some more reasonable than others. The Rag does slightly get caught up in himself at the end of this part, seeming to take Aichi's sarcastic comment about Leia being Force sensitive being bad writing seriously.
Don't even get me started on how Luke and Leia can all of a sudden read each other's minds. Bad writing alert, bad writing, hacks.
No, let me get this straight. So, Leia is Force sensitive, and she can sense other Force sensitive people. Alright, that's been established. That's okay, that's bad writing. But Leia, who has received no Force training, gets jettisoned into space, protects herself in the vacuum of space, and then flies herself back into a ship. That's good writing.
Aichi's point wasn't that it was bad writing, but if certain elements of the Force being used in the past wasn't bad writing, then this couldn't be bad either. With that said, there is a distinction that was pointed out. However, once we move on from that, there is a point about the prequels where Aichi didn't like the use of the Force.
Personally, I cannot stand the way the Force is used in the prequels. It's too much like a video game for me. It contradicts pretty much everything from the original story.
In the prequels, you had a whole Jedi temple. You had Jedi who spanned across the galaxy. They used their Force. I mean, it makes even more sense that in the context of the prequels, Jedi, who are the protectors of peace, who had a martial role to fulfill, would use this obvious power for that purpose. It is appropriate that in the prequels the Jedi use so much Force powers. It makes sense in the universe that they're in the setting that they're in, it just makes sense.
And although you could make the argument that the Force makes sense in the prequels, it does seem cartoonish and definitely detracts from the charm, at least from my point of view. And I think they're both reasonable standpoints. Then there's the case of what people wanted Luke to be. Aichi says that he wouldn't want to see Luke
fly around an X-Wing and kill stormtroopers with a lightsaber, but to me that sounds like possibly the worst thing ever.
Rank sarcastically responds,
yeah, that would have been so out of character for Luke to do those things. But you know what would have been in character for Luke Skywalker? Murdering his best friend's son while he slept? Yeah, that makes way more sense. I totally agree. That makes total sense.
Once again, I see both sides. I wanted something different, but I definitely didn't want a completely buoyant X-Wing Luke either, even in light of the original arc. A lot has changed. Once again, I think Rags takes Aichi's comparison to Yoda too literally.
It sounds way too similar to what we got with Yoda in the prequels.
The comparison to Yoda is clearly a lot more on just a changing of the character level with new context. It's like Yoda in the prequels with that it would have seemed more out of character for his presented age and maturity. I think it's a tough job to reinvent a character, and although I agree I don't really like the Luke we had, I can't say I would have preferred a energetic, youthful Luke, because age is meant to change a person. Once again, not necessarily to what we got, but I think using an old arc to lend expectation to a new one is objectionable as well, so I can see why Aichi took issue with it. So no, it's not dishonest to compare the two. This discussion comes back to Aichi calling this
meaningless fan service.
Some Rags disagrees.
Characters behaving in believable and established ways in a universe that makes sense for to have them doing the things that they're doing is not useless fan service.
But nothing particularly new is stated here. This is nothing more than a fundamental disagreement yielding a further disagreement. Then it is validly pointed out by Aichi that Hamill expressed a changing of mind on the project before sharing the context to this. Rags then retorts that a statement like this is outweighed by all the footage shown, and then assumes Hamill's intentions that he's trying to keep the peace.
Yeah guys, he made a Twitter post that totally has far more meaning and weight than the things he said to his audience.
This is the problem with the decontextualized interviews that have been shown. They present such a sultry atmosphere of a miserable Mark Hamill that it's hard to forget how anticipative he clearly was of the film throughout multiple interviews. Even in a lot of the interviews that he talks about creative differences, he does not seem forlorn.
You know, I was gonna throw some more Mark Hamill footage in here, but I just can't really stand to see Mark Hamill destroyed and sad on the inside.
Personally, I find this constant moral hammering of Mark Hamill quotes to be pretty tiring, especially because both Mahler and Rags try to argue when Mark Hamill is lying, and their standard for this seems to be based entirely around when he does or does not agree with them. When he says something bad about the movie, well, that's him stating his opinion, and we should feel bad for him, and we should cut that quote out and put it in our videos.
Who is this guy? How did the most optimistic, hopeful character in the galaxy turn into this hermit?
But when he says that he likes it, no, he's lying. He's trying to keep the peace. He's not being honest. Yeah, he's just lying. That part doesn't count. Don't put that in the video.
I had trouble accepting what he saw for Luke. But again, I mean, I have to say, having seen the movie, I was wrong.
Which of those things do you think is more like what Hamill really felt?
Here's the thing. Mahler and Rags are not a higher authority on what Mark Hamill means than Mark Hamill himself. They cannot claim that they are inside of his mind because they are not. I do not accept them trying to sit around and cherry pick which Mark Hamill quotes count and which ones do not.
All this emotional Mark Hamill content has escalated to the point where it is reasonable to read Mark Hamill's mind and state his intentions like we know them better than anyone else because of these compilations. If the Twitter post follows the interviews, then yes, his feelings may have changed, and you have no reason to assume otherwise. Regardless of how much you like to hypothesize that he's trying to keep the peace, it is just a hypothesis. Even the interview where Mark Hamill says he still hasn't fully accepted the character, he then goes on to state that he believes Rian Johnson was the best man for the job. Are you going to say one part of the interview is him being truthful and the next is just him trying to keep the peace? You can't just pick and choose what parts of Mark Hamill are being honest to suit your agenda. Aichi then follows with the point that
also, actors are not writers or directors necessarily. Creative conflict between actors and directors is incredibly common, but your job as an actor is to fulfill the director's vision, not the other way around.
Rags then responds stating,
yeah, the director's vision was fucking shit and was at odds with the established lore of the universe and the characters that had experienced and earned their arcs prior.
Neither of these statements really contradict each other, they're both valid in their own way. Where more dispute comes into play is where I Hate Everything then suggests that
the fact that Disney was willing to hand their biggest franchise over to one guy who has never directed anything close to the scale before is commendable.
Rags counters this by suggesting that it was
wildly irresponsible.
Both of these points have merit. There is a wholesome appeal to content not churned out by studios with suits, and often it can have more heart. But it also means the scope for failure is a lot more wild, and there's a lot less control in accounting for creative decisions. Rags returns fire by criticizing Aichi placing blame on J.J. Abrams for introducing unexplored concept.
Honestly, I think a lot of the blame for some of the fans' problems with the story should be more on the shoulders of J.J. Abrams. He's so obsessed with this mystery box idea.
Well, that's just the thing, isn't it? The Force Awakens, for all of its flaws, did something really well, and that was set up a potential amazing sequel.
It really depends on whether you think the ideas that J.J. Abrams presented were workable enough to condense into the next director's storyline. The best analogy that I can think of is that it's like Abrams building a framework for the next movie, but if the next director comes along with a different idea, then the framework may have to be adjusted with certain parts ignored. Now, whether that's on Abrams or not is completely subjective. Hopefully this was caution for the studio to think about what they set up in their film before they hand it over. This discussion is followed through to specific examples like Snoke, and though I do concur that Johnson should take the blame for not exploring Snoke and Rey's parents at all, having two such vast concepts would have been a lot to work into a script, though I did feel Snoke especially could have used more background.
And frankly, I think a lot of the audience for these films didn't care about these things. As pointed out by both Mahler and Rags, there are scenes in both sequel trilogy movies discussing how the lineage of Rey doesn't matter. And as for Snoke, who cared about Snoke? I've seen a lot of reviews where people said that Snoke was a really boring character for them, and that Kylo was the one that they actually wanted to see more of. Arguably, even in the original trilogy, Darth Vader was the one that everyone cared about, and the Emperor was just sort of a generic, slightly more evil baddie that Darth Vader could kill so that he could be avenged and suddenly be a good guy. No one really cared about the Emperor before the prequels. He was just this big, evil, boring, generic villain that we were all waiting to die. And there was basically no attempt to do anything other than make him look evil and kill him off, and no one really expected them to do anything else. In my personal opinion, taking the head evil baddie and having him get killed off and replaced with Kylo Ren, well, that's the most interesting thing they could have done, because it leaves us at a point where no Star Wars film has done something like this before. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I can confidently go into Episode 9 knowing that it's going to be something that I haven't seen in a Star Wars movie before. And really think about it, what reveal could they have possibly done that would have been satisfying in any way when it comes to Snoke? There's this video called How Star Wars Should Have Ended. It's a part of that series, most of you guys probably know it. And they did a pitch for how The Last Jedi should have ended, and it looks like a much worse film, but they included a scene where it turned out that Snoke was Darth Plagueis, like so many people had the theory. And I almost wish they would have done that, because it would have been so funny turning around to see the audience reaction, and just hearing people go, "Wait, who's that?" In his video, Mueller states that they should have taken this opportunity to explain how Snoke was connected to Palpatine.
Did Snoke rise to power once Palpatine was defeated? Was he trained by Palpatine? Was Palpatine trained by him?
And the thing is that despite the fact that they're interpreted as sequels, the sequel trilogy is heavily standalone. People usually go and see the movie without having rewatched all 6 of the original movies alongside the holiday special. So to say that the movie needs to stop and pander to and reference the original trilogy doesn't make any sense, because most of the audience, or at least like half of the audience, isn't going to know what you're talking about.
I do think it's hilarious that they work so hard to create these new characters and then they're like, they must have come from before.
I mean, Rey herself wasn't there for the original trilogy, so how would there be a scene of them discussing a big reveal involving the plot of the original trilogy if she wasn't there and she doesn't know what the hell they're talking about? How are they gonna stop and be like, Palpatine was my cousin? Actually, isn't that a big reveal?
IHE then references an article following this stating that Abrams had no idea what these reveals were going to be.
And it's since been revealed that he had no plan for what the reveals were even going to be from the get-go.
Rags then just denies it and says that it can't be true.
Bullshit. He definitely had ideas.
The truth is that I researched the article myself, and it appears that the article about it says that Ryan didn't receive any material about reveals. So even if JJ had plans, they never made it to Ryan. So this is something that I can neither confirm or deny. Then we have a very weird point about JJ saving face for the company.
But hey, you gotta save face for the company. I totally understand. I get it.
Once again, I do not know where that has come from. I do not see reasonable evidence that Abrams, of all people, is in a vow of silence. The burden of proof lies with Rags on such claim, and he has not proved anything. IHE says that
there's a side plot in like a casino, which most people agree is a bit clumsy and takes up far too much time in an already long movie.
Rags then concurs and says,
yeah, that was a train wreck of a subplot. They would have been far better ditching it and spending that time on something far, far more valuable, like, you know, the events that happened between episode 4 and episode 7.
Now, this on principle isn't a bad point, although it could be argued that 11 minutes of a film would have been hard to fill with exposition that you desire, although it definitely could have been filled with something more worthwhile. This is something that IHE subsequently brings up.
It really isn't that bad, and it's actually quite a short segment of the movie comparatively to the rest of it.
And Rags strangely responds by saying that,
so, who cares if it's only 7% of the movie? That's a lot!
Not really from my point of view. I don't know about other people, but to me, 11 minutes is not much. A better point would have been to have stated how the scenes themselves tonally cut apart important interaction between Luke and Rey, so the 11 minutes had more impact than originally let on. IHE then says there's
cheesy and awkward dialogue at points, but Star Wars has always had that, so that's not really a deal breaker for me.
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
Rags then interjects saying,
why do you have such a fucking problem with Luke behaving as someone in his position would exactly do? I'm like, do you just have a hate boner for Luke Skywalker's character like Ryan does?
This then happens again for the next 2 quotes as well.
You can't win, Darth.
I thought they smelled bad on the outside.
Laugh it up, fuzzball.
Scruffy-looking nerf herder! I don't know where you get your delusions, laser brain.
Yes, they're in character, but you'd be hard pushed to deny that they're at least somewhat corny. The idea of just telling someone they can't win in the midst of a lightsaber battle that they then lose does have its cornball appeal. The latter quotes are not disputed as being corny, so we can continue. Rags questions why they're bad,
but the rest were appropriate and in character, and they built them up with personalities. why are these lines bad?
But IHE never said they were bad. He even put a mini disclaimer that you may miss, saying that even though he doesn't dislike them, he just finds them goofy. Then IHE references two prequel quotes and states that he would find it ironic if you criticize the scripting in The Last Jedi but not the prequels.
No, it's because I'm so in love with you.
So love has blinded you.
I'll try spinning. That's a good trick.
Like, I find it pretty ironic if you love the prequels, but you're calling out this movie for having bad dialogue.
Rags then references the Destiny video as irony.
Oh, we're gonna start talking about irony. Is that what we're gonna do now? Besides, the defense of The Last Jedi that you seem to have is, oh yeah, but these other movies? It's not very compelling.
Before going on to suggest that the defense of The Last Jedi consists of referring to other movies to falsely justify The Last Jedi's flaws.
The Last Jedi had shit writing. Oh, but the prequels. Oh, but these movies that were made 40 years ago. Oh, but da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Defend them from the criticism that people are levying against it. Don't go to other movies we are not discussing.
If this was a valid point, it would be legitimate criticism. But if we break down IHE's last two main points, they were that firstly, he didn't mind the corny dialogue in The Last Jedi, mainly because that has been a recurring theme in the past films, and clearly it's nothing that jolts him. He wasn't trying to justify it in this instance, he's just stating that they've been used before in films, so he didn't find its inclusion here anything bad for him. His second point is that he finds people who complain about the dialogue here, but not in the prequels, to be employing double standards. Now this is presupposed by the fact that the dialogue in the prequels is pretty corny, but that is something that most people agree on, and if we assume that, then yes, it could be seen as double standards. He never at one point tried to defend the film through this, he accepts it and explains why he personally found it fine. Some people enjoy corny lines, he's not arguing it, he's just saying he found it fine. This is the problem, there isn't a disagreement, just one person's idea of placing conducive value on certain components being different to another. IHE states that
I find the somewhat ham-fisted anti-1% message kind of funny and ironic, given the context of what Star Wars represents.
Somehow Rags managed to get a gotcha in there.
And I'm certain they are thrilled that you paid to see it 3 times.
Which is almost fine art at this point. I have to give him kudos for that sort of level. IHE then asks a rhetorical question.
And yeah, treating animals nicely is important and everything. But was it really necessary alongside everything else this film was trying to achieve?
Which Rags then answers.
No, it was not. The answer is no. Mahler goes way more in depth than I do in his criticism videos, but man, they packed a lot of incompetence into 7% of this movie's screen time.
Before IHE subsequently answers it anyway, which I do find humour in. This is one of the examples that seem to illustrate how sometimes I think Rags seeks to interject a bit too much, to the point where you forget the whole sentence and the point the person may be trying to make.
No, not really. Other than to serve those character arcs.
What character arc? Rose Tico definitely did not have a character arc. She should have had her character arced, like, part of a trajectory from a trebuchet. I don't know.
A character arc represents a change, a journey in the character from A to B. Now, if you genuinely dislike that character arc, even if the person ended up worse, it's still a change. There's a point about humor with no particular differences, so we'll skip this bit. Then there's some exchange over the porks and the minions. This is mostly worthless, as it's a side note on IHE's video, but once again, it does demonstrate Rags' tendency to interrupt before IHE has completed a point. IHE says that porks and minions aren't the same.
So side note, I don't think comparing the porgs to minions is fair in terms of how they actually affect the movie. The minions are actually integral to the plot of all 3 Despicable Me movies. The porgs really don't affect anything, they're just birds.
Rags interrupts, makes a comment, adds that they're only there to sell toys.
Well, yeah, exactly, they're useless. They don't service the plot in any way. They're meant to sell plushies to small children. But do you not agree that things are more meaningful when they have a direct influence on the plot?
He lets IHE continue, who then compares Ewoks.
If anything, Ewoks are far more comparable to minions because they have a direct impact on the plot of the movie.
Rags then interjects again, adding the sell toy comment.
Yes. Porgs are just there to sell toys.
Once more before IHE completes the sentence, referencing that they're there to sell toys.
As well as being designed to sell toys.
That may be true, certainly, but again, they had an effect on the plot. They moved the story forward.
Amongst this, Rags also poses the question that would IHE not agree that something is more meaningful when it is integral to the plot?
But do you not agree that things are more meaningful when they have a direct influence on the plot?
I don't know how IHE would respond to this unless he made a video response, which he won't, but I'm sure he does agree that something is more meaningful to the plot when it has a direct effect. And he wasn't trying to state otherwise, as he said, it's just a side note. Having a Minions reference per video is a running joke on this channel, something that I didn't even notice until a few videos ago. Although I get it, as I assume uninterrupted content over a certain mark might be automatically claimed, and that if he were to skip over a certain part, some people would accuse him of missing points. It just seems sometimes the interruptions are unnecessary and excessive.
The idea that a Star Wars film can be said to be objectively without value because it sold toys How little do you have to know about the history of Star Wars, film, and the toy industry to know that the franchise has only been so amazingly successful and bombastic because of the existence of companies like Kenner? I went to the Museum of Moving Image a few weeks ago, and shy memes aside, it was a lot of fun, and there's a whole, chunk of the museum where they're just showing off Star Wars toys because it's that important to the story of how media was consumed in the West. A Star Wars movie selling toys does not make it soulless or capitalistic, it just makes it a Star Wars movie. Oh, but we're missing something really important here. At some point, I Hate Everything offhandedly states that he liked the kamikaze scene, and Rags responds by saying, "It was visually stunning, but it contradicted the Star Wars lore."
The hyperspace kamikaze was visually stunning, but it made absolutely no sense in the Star Wars universe.
So you're left going, wait, explain that point. How does it contradict the Star Wars lore? And the way I had to figure out what he was talking about again is going to Mahler's video, finding the same part, and then seeing what he had to say. And this is what Rags meant.
And that brings us to a major plot hole. Why, in all 7 of the mainline episodes of Star Wars and Rogue One up to this point, have we not seen this kind of maneuver?
Okay. First of all, why don't more Star Wars movies feature scenes of really expensive, big ships that they really need being used to ram into other ships? Maybe the same reason that all other war movies do that so sparingly. Because it's kind of a bad idea. Secondly, if you see a scene that is so visually stunning, so clever, and so obvious in terms of the universe, that you think to yourself, how has no one thought of this before? And your response is to say, this is bad because if this was possible, one of the other movies would have done this. If that's the case, then I don't know what to say because your standard for what these movies can do at this point is so limited that there's just nothing interesting or cool to be done anymore because we have to directly copy the first 7 movies. If Star Wars failed to reinvent, if they failed to make audiences grasp onto the universe in new ways, if they failed to be interesting and new, we would not have made it past episode 6.
Laura Dern's character is a bit of a mess, but
fucking disaster.
Just subbing in Admiral Akbar would not have solved anything.
It would have been a pretty damn good start. Her character was so useless, forced, and unnecessary that you could have swapped her for Admiral Akbar and nothing would have changed in the story.
For many, it's not the casting that defines the character, it's the character themselves. I found most of Holdo's decisions to be more questionable rather than who she was. So yes, Akbar wouldn't have changed much on a casting basis alone, but it also didn't help the actor portraying him had passed away. I think whoever was casted didn't make much difference. I don't think that was a big deal from a personal point of view, especially given the context, it's more understandable. Rags then makes an alternative scene suggestion.
It would have made much more sense if they insisted on keeping that stupid kamikaze maneuver. To have Admiral Akbar be the one to do it himself. Perhaps he turns the ship around and he begins to charge up the lightspeed engines, and then the Imperial captain sees it from the deck of the Supremacy and he turns around to say, "It's a trap," before Admiral Akbar slams through the ship and decimates the enemy fleet.
Which I guess is fine if that's what you want, though I think the "it's a trap" meme is rather dead at this point.
For them being fan service, because we ultimately know less about him from the movies than we do Laura Dern's character.
Because that's how they decided to write the characters, which was a huge mistake.
Both of these statements are true, and whether it's a mistake or not, as Rags asserts, it's hard for us to say what would be better as we have not seen the alternate reality in which Akbar is in charge. For me at least, I was more interested in what the character did rather than who they were.
Furthermore, I don't get why people act like replacing Dern with Akbar would have changed anything. I mean, in an alternate timeline where the actor hadn't died and Akbar had been given a featuring role, they wouldn't have had to change how Dern was written, because Akbar is such a boring, lifeless character that the only thing he is known for is being a meme in the early 2000s. Akbar being in the role would have changed nothing but the color of Dern's skin. I Hate Everything that makes an offhand statement that Poe basically screwed over the rebellion with his numerous mistakes, and Rags gets very upset about this, insisting that Poe was the only character in the entire movie who was acting sensibly. Now, I understand why you would think this is the case, because Poe is portrayed to make you think that he's the hero, but that's only so you can find out that he did wrong things later in the movie. If you rewrote the script in such a way that Poe got killed off in the first 10 minutes, and he wasn't in the rest of the movie, then the rebellion would have gotten out of this movie completely fine. Firstly, he destroys an entire classification of their fleet and kills well over 100 of their barely surviving crew members to do something that has nothing to do with their survival and against a direct order from their general. Now I can see why people would think he did the right thing, because I guess he blew up a lot of bad guys. But when they get a new leader, Poe actively acts like she must be evil or stupid because she's mean to him once. And again, we're meant to believe that Poe is on the right and that she is on the wrong so that we can find out that we as an audience are wrong. Poe then personally sends Rose and Finn on a mission that almost everyone seems to agree had no point and worked directly against the cause of the rebellion and just wasted a lot of time and resources. And how you can attack the director from an out-of-universe perspective, but not the person who planned the mission from an in-universe perspective, is extremely confusing to me. And then he figures out what Holdo's plan is, and he tells Finn, Poe, and some stranger over a weak comm signal the entire plan. And then he says, by the way, go on that ship with the bad guys, and then they all get kidnapped by the First Order, and the stranger tells the First Order what the plan is, and a lot of people die. But the fans stand around like, oh, Holdo should have told him more top secret military information. That would have really helped out. Contextually, they're on a ship where they have to guard the escape pods because almost everyone is trying to sneak out. Second of all, Poe told the First Order what the plan was. And your answer is, we should have just given him more top secret militaristic information. And was the difference between his understanding of the plan and the actual plan really that great? Because you see, he thought they were gonna sneak away on some ships and just try and sneak away from the battle in a non-heroic way. And then later Leia tells him, well, actually, we were going to sneak away from the battle and hide on a planet. Like, I don't know how more information would have stopped this from happening. Poe's just an idiot. Literally the only thing he does right in the movie is when he helps them escape from Crate without the First Order noticing. And the whole point of that scene is that Leia literally gives him command because he's doing the right thing. Like, you can pretend that from a certain skewed point of view, maybe Poe was secretly the hero of the movie, but in order to really do that, you have to ignore about 5 scenes of characters just pointing out that he's done something stupid and that he screwed everyone over, and Poe saying, uh-oh, you're right, oops.
Ideally, she would have had some development in a previous movie or something.
Ideally, her home address would have been on Alderaan.
I kind of understand what she did, because Poe Dameron did ruin everything.
What? No, Poe didn't. No, absolutely not. He didn't ruin everything. He was the only person in the fucking Resistance who was making the right calls at the time. He seemed to be the only person who was doing the right thing. What's worse is that Poe Dameron's arc, if you could call it that, basically revolves around him giving up the traits of his that were useful and were successful and saved people. Instead, teaching him to blindly follow authority even though it will lead to worse scenarios and outcomes. Or alternatively, to be less aggressive and hot-headed, even if it leads to worse outcomes because of it. It makes no sense.
Aichi follows his previous point by saying that although he accepts its plot contrivances, his own expectations from previous films in the Star Wars franchise has influenced him to account for that, and he doesn't know what else people would expect from him with regards to an explanation.
It was a little unnecessary and stupid and only existed to serve the plot, but again, Star Wars has always been filled with conveniences and plot contrivances, so it really doesn't bother me that much. I don't know what to tell you.
Rags then challenges him on Poe Dameron, which, although an alternative perspective explained by Quinton here, was a stone left unturned in Aichi's video.
You could explain why you think Poe Dameron ruined everything when that's clearly not the case.
Aichi then asks if looking back,
does that really sound like a dreadful movie a lot of people are selling it as?
Rags obviously replies by saying,
it was a shit film regardless of how rosy-eyed you want to get when you look back at it and try to describe it to us. The Last Jedi, and by a considerable margin, is the worst rated by audience Star Wars film that has ever existed. It took the prequels many, many, many years for people to turn on them for the films that they really were. The Last Jedi is so bad and borderline indefensible that it has taken basically no time at all, and right out of the starting gate, people are seeing it for the train wreck that it is. history will be extremely unkind to this movie.
There's some more back and forth, which just indicates that some people feel differently about this film. IHE references what he views as a great sequence on Crate. Rags then responds saying that it wasn't a good scene and somehow then assumes IHE knows all the criticisms being levied against him, which there's no evidence of him being aware of that. IHE praises the throne room, which Rags then criticizes as having too contrived choreography, and the fact that Rey is a Mary Sue. IHE praises the opening fight scene, which Rags counters as having poor military strategy and an example of putting creative vision first. Well, maybe IHE prefers creative vision, just a thought. IHE then praises the scene with Luke and Leia. Rags concurs, not without a jab at the film once again.
Fine, it was absolutely fine, especially in a movie filled with terrible scenes. It really stood out.
IHE then states he thinks there is more to love than hate about the film. Rags interrupts once again, demanding more explanation to IHE as if he is entitled to it.
My point is, I think there's so much more to love than there is to hate.
Well, here's one of the ultimate problems about this video of yours. You don't explain why it's good. You don't explain to us why these things are the way they are, you just declare them to be so.
With that said, I think I Hate Everything's narrative has become slightly lost in translation, especially through the middle third, but the point is that from his perspective, he thinks there are a lot of great scenes, and that's enough, and he thinks that the vitriol is unwarranted, given the fact that Rags hammers on points that he disagrees with and then just glazes over the points he finds hard to discuss. Things that IHE liked and were hardly disputed by Rags were the production value, the visuals, the score, the acting, and the cinematography. In a Star Wars movie, they are all possibly influential concepts to a viewer's opinion. The fact that IHE came out liking this movie isn't something that needs the in-depth response you believe you should be receiving. You didn't really challenge him on many of the general aspects that he enjoyed. In a 1 hour and 20-minute video, it may be hard to remember that these points were even made when they were given so little time. But these were points that were made, and they can't be ignored, because different people place different emphasis on different values. All these values have completely subjective input into whether someone believes a film can be derived as good or bad. Whether you assign as much value to them as IHE or not, IHE explained why he enjoyed the movie. He may have enjoyed the opening scene more because he cared less for military strategy and more for creative vision, for example. That's what he places emphasis on. He could accept all your criticisms, not that he would, but still he could, and still say that it was a good movie because he clearly found a lot of things that he could like, and each one of them was built from some small component, even though he gave it a general point in his video. There's a lot of discourse on both sides for a perfectly reasonable explanation. There is a lot to both like and dislike, but on different playing fields. Rags then says he sees why Mauler didn't want to respond to this video once again because Mauler is too cool, a comment so good that he had to make it twice.
I can see why Mahler didn't want to respond to this video. It's so broad and it's so open-ended that it's meant to be ambiguous.
It is so amazing that Rags has the nerve throughout this video to A, directly say that I Hate Everything should not be responding to certain points because they don't matter.
Why are you giving these stupid, idiotic things attention and time? Why are you giving such credence to these stupid, insipid, vacuous, empty, pointless, completely idiotic criticisms that hold no water?
And that B, his best friend Mahler made an amazing, in-depth Last Jedi review that debunks all of these points once and for all.
As you can see, that's a good 4.5, 5 hours worth of criticism on this one film because of how many things are wrong in it. That's how much time can be spent criticizing the terrible aspects of The Last Jedi.
You see, that's the big problem. Rags and Mahler walk around with this tone that because their videos are 5 hours long and everyone else's videos are 20 minutes long, their videos are automatically better than everyone else's in every single way. But that's not how opinions work. Your opinions are not automatically better than Alex's or mine or the right opinions or anyone else's simply on the basis that you said a higher amount of words. I'm going to show you 3 cut-down clips from Mahler's video, just to give you an idea of the sort of things that he makes commentary on.
Do you think I came to the most unfindable place in the galaxy for no reason at all? Go away. If you need your character to say they're in a place that's hard to find, don't use a word like unfindable. Why was Luke standing there? Why is he already so angry? Why did he just comically throw the lightsaber? If Luke looked down and simply allowed the lightsaber to drop from his hands and then he slowly moves away, that would be one thing. But to very deliberately throw it in such a please laugh now manner is jarring. Luke then makes a gesture, like, that's all you got, loser? Just another tonally aborted joke.
That right there is the standard for what Rags thinks all reviews need to be. Imagine if in my Last Jedi review I had given that much detail. Then Luke says he came to this planet because it was unfindable. I like the word unfindable. It's a good word. Oh, and then Luke throws his lightsaber over his shoulder to say that he doesn't want it. I liked that. That was funny. It made me laugh. Everyone in the theater, they all laughed. If he had dropped it, that would have been less good. I wouldn't have liked that nearly as much. Oh, then Luke is in the battle and he does this? Oh, that's so awesome. Everyone laughed. Everyone thought that was great when he did this. Oh, that was great. To imply that Alex's video isn't worth responding to because it didn't go into that level of detail is insane. You can do whatever videos you want to, you can do them however you want to, you can make them as long as you want to make them. But you don't get to run in here and say that you've magically redefined the meaning of what a review is.
IHE then says he went back to The Empire Strikes Back to see how the public will respond, and Rags just does a melodramatic response, incrementing his tone as he says how he is just trying to scrounge justification.
You are attempting to scrounge justification?
Which once again he isn't, it just feels like he's trying to stir up drama which isn't really there. Speaking of which, we have a moment that I personally didn't like at all from the Rags video. In this direct callback, with a similar reference to the earlier statement, IHE says that there are so-called fans, with a disclaimer in the bottom corner that he is specifically referring to those with the totally unreasonable hatred, and that you can still be a fan and dislike the movie, and before you can even finish the sentence, Rags is cutting in saying, oh, so they're not fans.
Oh, so they're not fans. You're gonna tell people who are and are not fans of Star Wars. Not only are you invalidating the criticisms that people have against this movie, now you've taken that one step further in saying that they're not even fans of Star Wars.
Rags then suggests that IHE should listen to himself because he can't take the fact that people dislike the film.
Stop and listen to yourself. Look what you're doing and saying because people didn't like your shit film.
Despite the fact that IHE precurses the sentence with the fact that these people are a vocal minority and that he has no problem with people who dislike the film. IHE follows with then saying that the toxicity has buried legitimate debate, a point that is perfectly reasonable, but Rags somehow manages to turn it on IHE doing the ho self-awareness point.
Has buried any real criticism of the film.
Self-awareness, folks.
By the way, can we just stop to remember all the times in this video that Rags has claimed that I Hate Everything isn't a real fan to prove his point?
If you call yourself a Star Wars fan, no. You're not what I'd call a Star Wars fan. I'd call you a Star Wars apologist.
And now we're attacking Alex because he put the words fans in quotation marks.
So-called fans?
Oh, so they're not fans. You're gonna tell people who are and are not fans of Star Wars.
Oh, yeah. How dare I Hate Everything try and say who is and isn't a fan. Yeah, me, I get to do that, cause I'm objective. I get to do that. Him, though, when Alex does it, that makes him a bad person.
No self-awareness at all.
IHE says it's not a piece of dreadful filmmaking, Rags says it is, and points him to Mauler's video again, as if Mauler's video is the be-all and end-all of Star Wars debates. Now, let me make it clear. In my opinion, it is one of the most comprehensive pieces, but many of his points are up for debate, and as I said, even 5 hours cannot begin to possibly cover all the points of contention, which is probably why Mauler expresses how he has meant healthy and stimulating debate in light of these videos, because there's always more to discuss. If it was objective, there wouldn't be anything to discuss. You wouldn't argue if a blue wall was green. Linking a video does not prove a point. It may be a starting point, but pointing to another video and going, so there, is about as convincing as the kid who threatens to get his older brother to beat you up. IHE then says,
it's reductive, and I really hope it doesn't send the wrong message to Disney that they should take away the freedom from the directors and writers, and turn it all into a focus-tested Jedi council of money-hungry fat cats who have no passion for Star Wars at all.
Hey, if it's good, I would gladly take that over the terrible fan fiction spawned from Rian Johnson's first draft.
Not much to discuss here. IHE still referring to the point of the vocal minority of earlier. It may be hard to remember that given all the dialogue in between.
I thought fans were supposed to see the good, not pass off nitpicks and complaints as a reason to hate a new movie in their beloved series.
Now I disagree here. Fans have no expectation to see the good or bad. Fans represent a loyalty, but they are more than just people who are meant to look positively at the film. But because it's a disagreeable statement, Raz gets annoyed.
I don't know what's more depressing, the fact that he said these words unironically, in earnest, or the fact that over 87,000 people listened to this video and said, yeah, this is good stuff right here. Yeah.
Bar the fact that there are many reasons why people could see that the video isn't as bad as you portray it, no one is endorsing every opinion spouted in this video. The reason why IHE's video doesn't have an atrocious like-to-dislike ratio is because in spite of its flaws, he's not a dick. No matter how much you try and frame it as that. People like and support content even if they may disagree. You make many fair points within the discourse part of the film, but on either either side of it, it is you trying to create this caricature of I hate everything that just does not represent him and will never represent him. He's not your Anita Sarkeesian. He's not someone who your anger feels remotely justified against. He's not going against a majority of Star Wars fans. He's stating how the debate has become weighted in toxicity, and there are people, whether you think he should be paying time to them or not, that exist, who are passing off nitpicks as criticisms, and for some reason, this minority seems increasingly vocal in the current environment. Rags then makes a ridiculous equivalent to people taking issue with the ending of Mass Effect 3.
If you didn't like the ending for Mass Effect 3 and felt like it betrayed you and the characters, then, well, you're just not really a fan of Mass Effect. Mass Effect fans are supposed to see the good. Why are you just nitpicking about the ending for the series when you should be focusing on the good things, you know, like a real fan does?
Putting words in his mouth like Aichi was explaining a code of conduct for how fans should behave, when all he says is that he feels that fans are meant to see the good. He's not saying that you cannot dislike it, he's just requesting that people be more open-minded and considering the positive factors. There's a difference, not something I necessarily think that any fan is entitled to be, but to paint it like he's demanding that all fans adhere to his statements like some authoritarian dictator is just incredulous, when he's clearly expressing something else. So this following rant is completely worthless to me because it's not the point. It just seems like an opportunity to rile up hatred and anger towards I Hate Everything, who in spite of his name is really quite tame. Rags seems to push I Hate Everything's response as if he's suggesting that people are meant to look past all the bad. No, even if you took the most general scope on what I Hate Everything was saying, looking at the good does not mean ignoring the bad. Once again, they're not mutually exclusive. And then Rags does the Destiny thing again, which, you know, was a bit overdue at this point.
Don't you know that fans are supposed to see the good in things? I Hate Everything? That's what fans are supposed to do, not just nitpick. That's not what a real fan does.
Rags then implies The Last Jedi is worse than the prequels in response to I Hate Everything.
Please do not insult the prequels by implying that The Last Jedi is equal in quality to them.
And alright, if that's the way you feel, that is fine. IHE expresses his feelings about the effort and filmmaking on show.
It's undercutting all the hard work and quality filmmaking that is on show in The Last Jedi.
Rags says,
I don't care how much hard work and blood, sweat, and tears were put into a film. If it's bad, it's bad. It does not get special passes or extra points because they worked hard.
Which is a perfectly fair point, and also exactly why his Disney has money dismissal of IHE's earlier points doesn't work. IHE then suggests
you can pick apart every single one of the Star Wars movies in the exact same way that people on the internet are doing now to The Last Jedi.
Rags disagrees and says,
absolutely not. Not all the films are equal in that exact same regard. The Last Jedi stands out as a particularly egregious example.
You can't really dispute what Rags is saying here. IHE has the burden of proof on that, so that one's on him. I'm not saying you can't, but no one has as such yet apart from the prequels. IHE then asks,
why let yourself get bogged down in the minutia when this movie is so much better than pretty much every other big budget Hollywood snooze fest that is being released at the same time?
Rags responds stating,
again, you seem to be going back into this ridiculous notion of, oh, but these other movies. I don't care about the quality of other movies. We're talking about The Last Jedi.
This is probably the only time the point is being used validly, however IHE is still questioning the response rather than the actual quality of the film, as Rags seems to assume again. IHE is asking why people are so angry at this film in particular when people are not angry at other films. However, I would respond to IHE and say there is a lot more at stake within the Star Wars franchise than a lot of other films this year, and the fanbase is a lot more passionate as seen, so IHE's point doesn't necessarily stick either, but I would personally agree that some have overreacted. And even if Rags had a point, he seems intent to ruin it by suddenly saying that from this, IHE is labeling criticism as minutia, which is once again not what he said at all. No, he thinks that some people are focusing far too much on the minutia. He's not saying that all criticism is minutia. It's the outrage that's trying to be stirred up towards IHE. He never said it wasn't worthy of criticism because there were other films. It's just straw man after straw man after straw man. Then we have this IHE segment that was intended to be a joke, but some people didn't take it that way.
Yeah man, The Last Jedi is the worst movie ever made. Forget about the prequels, which have aged horribly by the way. Yeah, I prefer The Mummy 2017.
It was more ambiguous than it seemed, which is fine, it clearly missed the mark. And then IHE very kindly shouts me out,
I'd like to thank The Right Opinion for helping to proofread and edit my script for this video.
And Rags points out that this is ironic.
And just when you think a movie like this could not have been wrapped up in an even neater bow of intense irony, he thanks a channel called The Right Opinion for proofreading it. What delicious and succulent irony that is.
And then states states in what I'm pretty sure is in an unironic tone that he has the right opinion.
Anyway, I didn't use a script, and my opinions are right because I can back them up and I can show examples and I can expand upon them. They could be demonstrably shown to be true.
In spite of the fact that my name is a completely ironic take on the subjectivity of opinions, though it is amusing to hear him express how delicious he finds his irony.
He only brings up your name to tie back into his objective value thesis, which no one else on the planet believes in. That's so funny to me. Oh, of course I hate everything collabs with someone named The Right Opinion because he thinks his opinion is correct, but it's not correct because I have the power of objective values on my side.
He then suggests that I should have corrected him on his fan statement.
He's a bit better at English than me, and some of my sentence structure is kind of strange sometimes, and he helped me out.
Yeah, like that part where you said that people criticizing the movie weren't real fans and that true fans were supposed to find the good in things and not criticize them. That was really weird.
Which, I know this is an outro and clearly more casual, but even if that phrase was as you frame it, it's not my job to change his narrative. I tell him what flows, not what points go. I'm not meant to agree with him on everything, as demonstrated here. But on the bright side, at least he's going to avoid my channel at all costs, so he'll never have to watch this video.
Well, this video was absolutely terrible, and it makes me want to avoid his at all costs. Good job.
Oh, thank God. I don't think I could stand to watch him make 5-minute rants between every sentence we say in this video.
I think the closing comment is indicative of my problem. IHE jovially comments that his inbox is open and ready for death threats, that he will inevitably receive.
And my inbox is open and ready for all the death threats.
And Rag, still clearly in his Anita Sarkeesian destruction mode, takes this as a cry for pity.
Oh, fuck off. Nobody's feeling pity for you. It's pathetic. Show a backbone.
I think this exemplifies my issue with this video. There are some decent points and counters that could be discussed, particularly on the more cinematic side, but it constantly tries to stir up this hatred where I cannot really see the grounds to do so, either by equivocating what IHE is actually trying to say, or the points he's trying to make, or just provoking this outrage which seems completely lost on me. IHE is not Anita Sarkeesian. He would not be promoting someone like me if he was. His video on this was not an attempt to ostracize people who didn't enjoy the film. It was an attempt to question the outrage culture that has spawned from this, particularly the toxic nature that has transpired with his own thoughts integrated. I can understand that certain narratives have become weirdly intertwined and mixed signals may be interpreted. It is far from my favourite IHE video, but to frame him as this person who's out for the blood of everyone who dislikes The Last Jedi is something that I cannot disagree with more, and when he attempts to demonstrate that he's going after extreme people, Rags becomes annoyed and says he's meant to be addressing the real criticisms, as if there are points that we're meant to address and points we're not. And when he expresses what he does like, although sometimes Rags may dispute him with fair and reasonable points, other times he just comes up with half-assed explanations to denigrate or dismiss the point, and he continues to bring up this Destiny 2 comparison which is insufficient on multiple occasions. Although he does close the video by saying he watched the Destiny 2 video, it really does not feel like he did, because it in no way reflects the sort of vitriol that IHE is referring to. In all honesty, you're unlikely to enjoy the video if you're an IHE fan, just because of that tone of contempt that Rank seems to pertain. If this is something you enjoy, then more power to you, but it's not for me, I'm sorry. One of the more thought-provoking points made was about the negativity bias, but I'm not sure IHE covered it in the right way. You see, for me, there's a lot more to say when you find something you disagree with rather than when there's something that you agree with. And in reviews and in responses like these, it can often give off the impression that there was more dislike than like. I concede that Rags made some fair points, but on balance, I find that he was too obsessed with his own negativity and consequently diametrically opposing himself to almost everything that IHE said, and turning perceptively anodyne statements into controversial ones. To sum up, I do not like Rags' video. I wish him the best and hope that he takes my feedback in good spirit, though I don't necessarily expect him to. For me, there were parts of this video which feel intended to spite or turn people against I Hate Everything in ways that I don't think I could endorse ever. I'm aware he's not looking for my endorsement, but that's my opinion. Take it or leave it. Big thanks to Quinton Reviews for appearing. I'll leave his link in the description and pinned comment. I'm sure many of you are familiar with him already. On top of that, even bigger thanks to everyone who's been involved with editing this. Their links will be in the description too. Check out their stuff. This was not easy to make. Anyhow, I'd love to hear what you think. Let me know in the comments below. Until then, I'm The Right Opinion, and I'll see you in the next one.